one-on-one
welcome to episode number 91 of Killer POV. I'm one of your hosts, Rob G from Icons of Fright. With me as always, Rebekah McKendry, Fangoria.
Hello.
Howdy.
How you doing?
On his phone.
He's just like...
the Grandmaster Elric Kane.
Like a 14-year-old girl.
Just updating some shit. Yeah.
He's even got glitter stickers on his phone.
What's that about?
Yeah.
Kids? You're going to blame it on the kids?
No, I'm just like kind of in touch with my
yeah,
fans.
you're so like a Suburban Gothic fan.
Segue.
Inside jokes.
Holy smokes.
Oh, that's right. I forgot all about that.
Oh, you did? Well, honestly, we're going to tackle found footage today, something that we've been wanting to talk about for a while, although there's not a lot of good ones.
And I can't believe I'm going to say this because I even made a film about how much I hate found footage films.
I know.
But I have quite a few that I was like, you know what? I really like that film. Once I started looking over my list, I was like, you know what? There's a lot I can appreciate. So I decided with found footage films, it's either I really like them or I hate everything about them and think you're an abomination to the genre. So that's kind of
good barometer.
How can you imagine a found footage? Parker, can you just turn my earphones? I can't hear shit. Can you imagine if it was a technique that we could pull out every once in a while when it suited a film?
Oh, yeah.
And rather than it was a trend where everyone had to make their film about
and that'll be the interesting thing to talk to our guests about in terms of how and why they incorporated that into their story, whether it was something that they wanted to do for storytelling purposes or if it was part of the mandate to get it made. So
often those ones where it's a documentary often work a little better. In their case, it was like, we have a reason to be shooting.
We are researchers, and it made sense.
Yeah.
But I'm always a little bit more less forgiving about the ones like Devil's Due, where it was actually written as a script and then was converted and things like that. Or at least that's what I heard. I should actually verify that. But I always heard that one was written as a script and then
turned into found footage.
Not a single person saw that film, so don't worry.
Nobody.
I can't say I did either. I tried. It was not my cup of tea.
Right. Well, I saw so many films in this last week, so we need to hit the ground running.
And we went out together a bunch of times too.
Two of them were group efforts. So let's talk about those first. We all went together to see Suburban Gothic, the new horror comedy from Ricky Bates.
You gotta set
Jr.
the scene for this because this was crazy. Because, like, literally, we get there and we're expecting our normal midnight screening with the horror crowd, which
also
is
after Excision. Excision is a very specific kind of film.
It's very adult. It's very intense. It's very kind of body horror. And so we show up for this movie, and honestly, I was expecting the normal horror crowd, like all mostly guys, like 90% guys in black t-shirts, and that's just kind of what you see. We get there, and there's a line wrapped around the block of 14-year-old girls in pajamas.
14 to about 18, I'd say.
Oh, okay.
We're of age.
14 going on 32.
I think you're being generous.
Well, look, I don't want to make it too obvious that we were the oldest people there.
We were by far like the oldest people there. It was a little weird.
Actually, the little boy from Christmas Story was the oldest man there.
Oh, yeah. The little boy from Christmas Story showed me pictures of his cats. Yes. I was kind of excited about it.
Yeah, so we show up, and mind you, this is the third sold-out screening of the night. There were two other ones, other parts of town, and we show up, and it was hilarious because the character wears pajamas a lot, and I guess there was a tweet for people to. So there's like a line of girls wearing pajamas, and Elric like, "Hey, what movie are you here to see?" And they're like, "Suburban Gothic," and he's like, "Why?"
Yeah, trying to figure out like what the pull was because we knew it probably wasn't Ricky.
No, and it turned out that it was the lead, Matthew Gregg Gubler, who is in
Criminal
Minds. I didn't realize how big Criminal Minds was.
It's apparently he has. I don't even think that it's Criminal Minds is so huge, although it may be. But apparently he has this like Twitter feed of Goobler Nation, and it's very well followed by puberty-laden females.
Yeah, I would think Cat Denning too. Sense. But it's definitely him. So that was the scene, and then we went in to see it. I already saw the movie and I liked it a lot, and this was my second time seeing it, but this was new for both Rebekah and Elric. Yeah. So thoughts?
I wrote to Rick afterwards. I really felt like it'd be an amazing pilot for the show that the film ends with.
Right.
Because I love the humor. Yeah, my gut feeling was the horror elements are the weaker parts. The comedy's great. And I really and I love how foul-mouthed and inappropriate, and he hits all stereotypes hard. I had a lot of fun with it, and I really I think he should dive fully into comedy. Like, I feel like he might be the, Todd Solondz heir apparent, was my feeling. The horror parts are kind of like, I think, purposely a little cheesy and stuff. But it's still, it's a lot of fun. I think people enjoy it. But the writing, I think, is the real standout, is his kind of just timing and writing.
Right. Yeah, I got to agree. The comedy was what sold me on it. Because, the horror, it was just kind of that digital blob thing.
Right.
Which, it served a purpose, but it wasn't what was great about the film for me. And even the ghost elements were not what was great about the film. It was just these dark, hilarious characters interacting with each other.
Yeah, Ray Wise was fantastic as the racist dad. And,
very racist. And it reminded me of that 80s kind of humor, because back then they were not PC about anything.
Yeah.
And it was funny because the first question from the audience, which I know really pissed Ricky off, was about, how can you make something so...
It was about, he's got Hispanic gardeners.
Oh, yeah. And he's like, why did you cater to, to being so, to the stereotypes? And he's like, look, my girlfriend's Mexican and that I've been with for 5 years. Like, it's pointing them out how stupid they are. Like, he's like, if you didn't get that, I don't know what to tell you. And again, that's how a lot of the movies that we grew up watching were. They were pretty overt in their... the comedy of the stereotypes. I like it. I don't think it's, I like it a lot because it's him. I don't think it's as strong a movie as Excision. But again, I know that he was working with far lower a budget. And at the same time, I within 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, this is Ricky Bates. Like, he has a voice.
Right.
Like, that's what this movie proved. He definitely has his own unique voice.
I don't know
and
what
humor.
it was about, but something about it really spoke to me about like TV, and like it just had that formula that I could see as a show, especially if it was Kat Denning and him.
Right. It was very much like the American Family sitcom with a mom, dad, and son.
Yeah, that kind of setup is true. But yeah, I could just, when it ended, I was like, oh, this would have been cool. Like, it's like a Frighteners light.
Yeah.
But a politically incorrect version of that.
Yeah.
And that would make a great show.
Yeah, and it's cool. Suburban Gothic. It's on VOD now, so you guys can check it out as well. The other one we saw together a few weeks ago, Elric mentioned that he got an import of What We Do in the Shadows.
That's right.
And we all got together and got to see it, which was kind of neat because I really didn't know anything about it. I knew it was a comedy. I knew it was the guys from Flight of the Conchords. But I loved it. I haven't laughed that hard at a comedy.
Watching with you guys, it was even, all the jokes played even better watching with other people. We watched it with some other friends.
Yeah.
And the jokes just I mean, one of them is probably the best joke in years.
Oh my gosh.
One line by Jermaine Clement.
The sandwich.
The Virgin.
Of course,
one of the best lines I've ever heard. And you people couldn't hear the next 2 minutes.
Because we were all just laughing so loud. And again, it's like within the first 5 minutes, that it's like, this is a rock solid comedy. But more importantly, you can tell it's not a group of filmmakers that are like, oh, let's do like a spoof on vampire stuff. You can tell that they really are fans of this stuff. You know what I mean?
Especially with the character Peter, because they're vampires from all different time periods. Like, one is kind of a Victorian dandy, and one is medieval, and one is I don't even know when the other character, the
Nosferatu one.
But then Peter is like, he's the Nosferatu one, and they said like he's 2,000 years old. He's not coming to the flat meeting and things like that. Like, he was apparently like predated like Jesus and is still around.
And the Beast.
Yes.
It really is the best. And how surprising, after Housebound, you're like, oh, there couldn't be a better comedy horror film.
It is and I love Housebound, but like,
I think this is a better comedy. Housebound's a better movie. If that's possible.
Exactly.
The craft of Housebound's a little more complex, But What We Do in the Shadows, like, I mean, in terms of pure comedy, that's the most I've laughed for so long.
It's this early. It's already my number one.
It's really.
And now I'll blow your minds. What We Do in the Shadows, found footage film.
Well, technically, it's more of a documentary.
It's like the Sacrament.
But we're going to get into that later because the whole idea is like, so found footage isn't literally footage that's been found. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. Now it's become an aesthetic thing.
At this point, we could lump it in with POV and documentary,
whatever. And that's because we're in the middle of a YouTube generation, a generation that is used to filming and watching in reality.
I mean, it's so prevalent to how we watch
all of those things now fall under the category of found footage.
And I think that's
fair.
I
felt that What We Do in the Shadows did to make us not immediately point and go, oh, it's a found footage film. It used tripods, which I'll get into in a sec. They clearly set up the shots, and they had multiple cameras going.
They also had a logo at the front saying you're watching a documentary.
Yeah.
This whole
New Zealand
film is meant
documentary.
to be a finished film.
Yeah.
We're not watching clips that are going to be strung together, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
And apparently they did a lot of their interviews like at Sundance, still in character, saying this is a documentary, and they wouldn't break that idea that it's not a documentary, which I like that. That's
That's pretty
awesome.
funny.
But for those who don't know, it's Fly the Conchords people behind it, and it shows through and through.
Yeah, and I think it's coming out later this month, or
think
they're
it's
trying to
February,
self-release
isn't
it.
it?
Yeah.
I think Comedy Central, some comedy channel, I think bought it and has some hand in it. Which I was thinking to my brain, why doesn't HBO just release it as a movie directly to their customer? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's Conchords, which they
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
But we'll see. It's a great movie.
All righty.
Glad you liked it.
What else do we have? What about you guys go? Because I have a lot of them, and I'm just
Okay.
going to try to go through them quick.
I've been on an Aliens kick. Because I got into a discussion with somebody a couple of days ago about, can aliens be scary? And I don't mean like aliens, like Ripley and Newt. I mean like abduction movies, like Greys.
Communion.
And that's
Communion
what
creeped the fuck out of me.
the one that started it off is it was somebody who didn't like Dark Skies. And remember, I loved that
didn't
movie.
see
Like
it,
it genuinely creeped me out, like as far as abduction
too.
movies go. And the person I was talking with was like, oh, that movie was just awful. Alien abduction movies are never scary. So I've been trying to find one that's like just as scary as I think Dark Skies is. Communion, I keep hearing about. I have never seen
Whitley
it, so I
Strieber.
need to see Communion.
I think the
Right?
reason why it's scary is because it's treated like realistically. At least somebody says it's realistic. Like Whitley Strieber, it's based on a book. This happened to me, which just makes it a little more legit, whether it's
Yeah.
true or not.
So I started with the 2 Alien films that came out last year that people had said were good. So I watched Honeymoon.
Oh yeah.
I love the concept. I greatly appreciate that they were able to build that much plot out
Did
of
you just give me a major spoiler? Because you said alien movies. Is that what you're talking about right now?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a spoiler because it's kind of.
You kind of know that from the
Well,
get-go.
and it's questionable whether it's aliens. They don't actually spell it
Say.
out.
All right.
Really, nothing.
Stuart Gordon raved about it because of its
Way to
kind
go,
of
Ben.
unknown.
There's not enough going on to say what's going on.
Oh my
Okay.
god, this is another one of those Bekah
Another one
reviews.
of
No,
those.
I
She
appreciate
watched
it.
4 minutes.
I watched the whole damn thing. No,
Honeymoon's a
and
great
I
movie.
greatly appreciate it. And you were right. That actress in it, Rose Leslie,
great.
freaking amazing. I loved her. But I didn't like that it was probably the first 30 minutes. All we did was watch them like have sex, go fishing, have sex again, go for a hike.
But it's all
have sex.
connected. You had to feel like I even found that kind of annoying while I was watching it. But when you get to the end, it all makes sense. It's reliving. Well, I can't talk about it without
Yeah.
spoiling, but it's central to what the film is
It
about.
was
if you know.
tenuous to get there.
Maybe, yeah.
So,
That's
yeah.
fair.
But I mean, I liked what it did and I liked where it went. And the makeup and the final shot at the end was really great. So I recommend it to
Yeah, it's a good
people.
movie. It's a good movie.
Don't go in expecting like action packed craziness because literally for the first half an hour, you're going to watch 2 people go camping and have sex. So
if you like my kind of movies, you're gonna love it. If you don't, then don't rent it.
And so then after this, I was talking yesterday with Morgan Peter Brown about Honeymoon, and he was like, oh, you should check out Coherence. So last night I watched Coherence. Have either of you guys seen it? It's a doppelganger film, kind of. It's another one where 8 people at a party, and then there's a comet going overhead, and then they start realizing that reality has split. And their house is now like 12 different houses, and there's like 12 different versions of them. As
That
soon as
sounds
they
like
leave
plus
their,
one.
Exactly. It is plus one. The whole concept of it. And they came out really close together. And the setup of them is very, very similar, where you've got drama amongst these people, but now there's 12 of all these people. So you've got drama with all of these people. So the setup is really similar. It was...
Amazing.
It was interesting the way that it tied everything together. Actually, it did one thing that it really bothers me in films where it felt like much of it was improvised because everyone was talking at the same time. Like it would plant the camera on the table and then it would just have 8 people crossing in front having a party, talking with 2 other people, and then 2 other people over here having a conversation. And so
There's a word for that. It's called padding your movie. It's like, I need another 20 minutes. Party scene.
It was
cross-cut.
it was tenuous again, where things were out of focus for.
Did you see,
it was-
what was that one, the guy who we were talking to at Suburban Gothic, was Don't Blink from last year? The one that had...
Oh, yeah.
That's an
That's-
alien abduction thing, I think.
Zach Gordon.
Okay, I need to see that
With
one.
the guy from Beverly Hills 90210.
And somebody recommended
Jason
Fourth
Priestley.
Kind to me, which actually is a found footage film.
It is, yeah.
I
That
never
I
saw
don't
one.
think I've ever seen.
Good trailer. I never saw the film.
And then the big film, my last one for the week. So I'm going to be watching Fourth Kind this week, and I'll watch it next
I
week.
see.
This one I found last week when we were talking about Scream Queens. It was on a list I was looking at, and I was like, and I came in and I was like, Rob, this was on like a Scream Queen list. It's this movie called Detention. I've never seen before.
Detention.
And
Detention,
Rob immediately was like, "You're gonna fucking love it, Bekah. You will know in the first 5 minutes what type of movie it is, but you will love it."
ADD, the movie.
He was right. I fucking loved that movie from the word go to how it tied everything together at the end. It's a slasher film, but
Sort of.
it's kind of got a lot to it. And I definitely don't watch it when you're tired because there is so much going on. It's frenetic the entire
It's
time.
Joseph Kahn, right?
Yeah, Joseph Kahn.
Yeah, I thought it was
and like
fun.
I said, it's John Hughes on
Yeah, it feels like
on
John
Speed.
Hughes.
Yeah, John Hughes on Speed. That's it exactly. It's very much that Ferris Bueller, like I'm talking to the camera the entire time. I'm self-aware of the music that you're playing to create the mood around it. So they're aware of all the cinematic devices, and it's about high school.
What was the reception to that? Because when I was watching it, it was after it all died down. I was like, "This is a good movie."
I remember it almost immediately having sort of a cult thing because I know they were showing it to Cine Family and everybody kept saying, "You got to come see this movie because it's just insane." So I remember it initially just having that sort of
I think it was Scott
built-in cult
Weinberg
thing.
who
got
got into a fight with the director online, and
Oh,
it became
really?
a big thing. The two were hating each other.
Yeah, he gets in a fight
surprisingly,
with a lot of people.
It has bad ratings on Netflix or Amazon. I can't remember which one I watched it on. I want to say
people are
Netflix.
crazy.
I want to say it's instant streaming. But when I was like pulling it up, I watched it with two other people, and they were both like, "Bekah, this doesn't have very good ratings. This only has like 1.5 stars or something like that." It may have been a little bit more,
They're wrong.
maybe 3 stars, but even still, it wasn't like 5 stars across the board, and it had some bad reviews underneath it. But yeah, I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, it's
So
fun.
highly recommend Detention.
I love it.
I got one.
Go for it.
And it's the ultimate segue to our topic. So I know we're not ready to segue to our topic, but I'm going to throw down anyway. I saw not part 1, not part 2, not part 3, but part 4 of the Wreck
Yeah, I
films.
know.
And here is the most amazing review that you would never hear in a million years come from my lips. I have never missed found footage more than I did watching Wreck 4.
Wow.
I could not believe
It's a
it-
traditional, straightforward
it's a
narrative.
straightforward narrative. It is dull. It is more of a sequel to Demons than it is Wreck, I would say. Like, it has a lot in line with Demons. They even use it. The setting's great. Like, they end up on a boat for most of the film, which would have been cool. It's shot like a big action film almost, like the way it's put together. It's directed by the original director. So everyone's been expecting him to come back and go gangbusters and really knock it out of the park. It is, like, easily the most disappointing film I've seen this year. It's not a bad film, but it's far, far from a good film. Like, it's not like a crappy film. It's just, it does nothing with all of these setup things. As somebody tweeted, like, I just want to see a bunch of freaking priests fighting, villains. It's like, no. Instead, you're going to get a bunch of Marines fighting and trying to take something out of you. It's just
That seems
so
like a step
generic.
back from.
But I'm the guy who used to think he hated found footage, but tonight I'm going to start exploring some of the plus sides too, because I really missed it, and I know that there's one reason I missed it, and there's one word that really, if you talk about one positive found footage, it's the word immediacy. When you shoot in found footage, you have an immediate reaction to what you're watching, so they can just throw you into shit.
Yeah.
And this did not have that. And,
Wow.
and instead, because they're setting everything up, I'm like, oh yeah, here comes a demon running at the camera. I'm like, eh. But if that had been shot like Wreck 1 or 2, I think that exact thing could have completely worked. And I was shocked by feeling that way. I was like, this is really boring me. And I struggled to get through it. By the end, I was just like, oh man, generic, really disappointing end to that series, I think. But some people will probably like it. It's like I said, it's not terrible as a movie, but I was really shocked. There was a lot of stuff that started making me think it was good timing for the show, because I started thinking about all the pluses. I mean, there's tons of negatives of found footage, but a lot of them come from the fact that people were being forced to make lots of found footage movies, or choosing to make them as a gimmick, and the actual technique of what it does provide, which is the same as reality TV. Reality TV, turn on, there's no setup, you're just in it.
Right.
And you're just following somebody.
In those guys' defense, they did one of the best. And it's kind of like when you do that good.
I mean, Wreck 1 and 2
right out of the bat.
brilliant.
They're in
Yes.
my top 10.
Hard to do
I
it
mean, say
again.
top 5, top 3, maybe even like Wreck 1 and 2. I mean, so anyway, I was really surprised that I missed that, because I think also there's this thing, right? Like with certain franchises, probably it'd be the same with Paranormal Activity. If the next Paranormal Activity movie was shot like a normal, I'd probably be like, why?
Right.
Because you've already set up what you do.
That's the gimmick, and that's the whole point
and
of
so
it. Yeah.
whereas if Insidious 4 was shot like found footage, I'd say fuck off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't
right.
want to see it. So anyway, I was surprised. I wouldn't recommend renting it. I'd wait till it's cheaper. It's worth $1, not $6.
Netflix. It's worth a Netflix.
Yeah, it's worth a Netflix.
All right. I saw a whole bunch of movies. Let me just run through these
Right
quickly. There's one recent one I've been curious about called Frankenstein versus the Mummy. And this is a new movie. Image Entertainment is putting it out on February 10th. And I saw the trailer, and it looked kind of neat. It looked, it's like a modern set thing where it's just two monsters fighting each other. I'm always down for that. And I'm really fascinated because, the writer-director is this guy named Damien Leone, and he's only done one other picture called All Hallows Eve, which I've never seen either. But I'm very conflicted about this movie. I didn't like it, but I didn't hate it either. It's somewhere in the middle. Number one strike is it's 2 hours long.
Ooh.
And I just can't handle any movie that's over 90 minutes, especially with this premise. Number two, it's that weird thing because technically when you're writing a movie, you need to forget every other version of that character beforehand. But I feel like when it's something as well known as Frankenstein or Dracula or whatever, I kind of don't want the dude to be named Victor Frankenstein. I don't want people to be surprised that he's created a serum to bring people back to life. You know what I mean? Like, we're at that point. It's the same thing with zombies. Like, I don't want, I want everybody in the movie to be aware of what zombies are because it's part of pop culture. Like, I always say, treat things the way it would if it happened right now in this room, So part of it's a little difficult to get into.
Modern Frankenstein would be cool, like one set in
he is,
2015,
and that's the thing. It's because he's this young, hip guy with kind of like short hair and stuff. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, and inside I want to be like, well, he really should be like a nerdy guy with glasses. But then I'm like, but who am I to decide that? If this is a modern interpretation, then yeah, I guess this dude could be Victor Frankenstein. He teaches at a school. He's in love with this other teacher who's like investigating the whole mummy thing. But at the end of the day, it's like you just want to see two cool looking monsters fight. And the monsters look cool. When they kill people, it's gory as hell and it looks awesome. And then when they fight, I mean, look, it's a 2-hour movie and they save it for the very, very end. And it is far too quick. So that's my biggest disappointment is like you have a really long movie with not enough fight. And there's some good thing. The reason I recommend it at least is it reminded me of Full Moon in their Paramount years, like in the late 80s, early 90s when they had Paramount money. They were making cool looking. It reminded me of something
how this got made.
I have no idea. I'm fascinated by it. And it seems to me like something Charlie Band would have done in the late 90s. He would have been like, oh, let's just take Frankenstein and Mummy and we'll have them fight. And that's the gimmick. So it's got that vibe of those movies. I don't necessarily, I mean, when I was, a teen, I loved them. Now I'm a little bit more picky. So I thought it was worth watching. Check out the trailer. And after you see the trailer, if it looks cool to you, you'd probably want to see it. But again, it's really long and not enough fight in it. But it was interesting.
And I have a correction before we move on to Rob's next movie. Apparently, Devil's Due was actually written as a found footage film.
Okay.
I'd always heard that it was written as a script and then converted to found footage when the
That might
studio
also be
brought in
true.
radio silence.
You never know.
But
You never know. Yeah, because there's like 10. I know there's another script called The Vatican Tapes, which I think is finally about to come out.
Yeah, it's about to come out. Yeah.
Oh,
that
but
might
it
have
was
been-
originally called Borderlands.
No.
No.
I have that listed.
Oh, okay.
There's a completely different movie called
Vatican Tapes has one of the directors of something big. I can't remember what it is, but something that we have all seen.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
looked it up
I'm
recently.
sorry. I'm getting confused now. Yeah, Vatican Tapes is doing like a full theatrical though, right?
I think so.
But I mean, I remember I have that script from like 3 years ago. And I think that, because there were like several like that. They were like, oh, let's, because Last Exorcism was successful. So like, oh, let's make these into found footage movies.
Was Vatican, I wonder if that one was originally written like that.
It might have been. I'll have to look at it again. Okay, so there was that. Our friends at Blue Underground are releasing God Told Me To on Blu-ray because
What's that one about? I don't know
of
that one.
Elric Kane.
Yeah, I heard you
Propriety.
got
might
no
have
free
something to
copy.
do with
I'm just
that.
gonna
You
sit here
told Bill
crying.
Lustig on episode 50 to release it, and he said yes.
I told him
He
Elric told
did
him
it.
to.
Brand new 4K scan.
I gotta see it.
This movie's insane.
That's insane. You're halfway through and you're
Literally-
like, what just happened?
And the left turn, I mean, the
it's
basic
one of the biggest
premise,
in the history of film.
it's unbelievable. But I'm fascinated by Larry Cohen as a filmmaker.
That's the one that really tips it, where you're like, oh, this is really. No, do you know? I think I told the story on the show, but Gaspar Noé was walking in New York and tracked down Larry Cohen and said, "This is the greatest movie, and I want to remake it." So Gaspar Noé actively is trying to remake God Told Me To, the weirdest movie ever made. Pretty much.
Wow. That makes total sense, though.
I
that
just
he
don't
would
even know
wanna
what that
do
would
it.
be. I'm just like, what? And the way Larry Cohen tells the story, it's like some bald guy, I don't know who he is, says he made some movies. I looked him up later.
Yeah, well, I mean, the basic premise is there's a sniper going around there, shooting people in New York City.
Andy Kaufman,
one of his first on-screen roles, is one of them.
Yeah.
And anytime, right before they get caught and they kill themselves, they're just like, "Why are you doing this? God told me to."
Yeah.
Really creepy premise. And then some of the more radical left turns that come later in the movie are just like so batshit that you're just like,
and really
I
well
can't
shot
believe
though. Like those parts are really good that they really sell what they're doing. It's not cheap.
Yeah, no, it looks
it's
good.
Weird.
And again, I'm fascinated by how the movie was made because New York of that era trying to pull this stuff off.
Yeah. That's in my top 10 of wanting to see theatrically. Seeing a print of that, I'd be like, wow.
It'd be fun.
But the Blu-ray will be as good.
The Blu-ray looks fantastic. It's a new scan.
Good extras, did you see?
Yeah, among the extras, they shot an interview with the lead, Tony LoBianco.
Who's in one of my all-time favorite movies, The Honeymoon Killers.
Yes.
Which is
which is why Larry Cohen
movies. Yeah.
got him for. He saw him in that movie.
Okay,
that's the movie he saw him in.
That makes sense. That's one of the most perfect. Like Night of the Hunter is directed by a guy who made one movie. Leonard Castle.
And he said that Scorsese started Honeymoon Killers and then left, and somebody else picked it up. But also, we talk about the New Beverly on the show a lot. There's a great Q&A with Larry Cohen at the New Bev after they showed God Told Me To. That's on the disc in its entirety.
Awesome.
And he's so funny and so interesting.
He's the best,
he tells amazing stories. For example, I didn't know he shot 2 or 3 days with Rob Forster and had to fire him.
Wow.
Yeah, he just wasn't working.
Because Lustig had worked with Rob Forster.
Yeah, he had him in this movie, and it just didn't work. So there was that. He also tells a great story about Bernard Herrmann, who was supposed to score this, and he talks about going out for dinner with him, and them talking about it, and then he passed the next day. It's so there's amazing stories just in the New Bev segment.
Of anybody alive, and especially in the genre, he's the best storyteller. In my
He's pretty
opinion.
great.
He's just a natural born storyteller.
Right.
Whether he's a director or a writer, he just knows how to tell stories.
Yeah. He's fantastic. A really amazing writer. I'm going to shoot through these really quick, but also on February 10th, last week I talked about Vampire's Kiss, the very odd Vampire's Kiss. This week I watched High Spirits with Steve Guttenberg.
Did you freaking love it?
No.
Oh,
love is not a word I would use for it. It was okay. I had interesting. He's really good in it. I don't think the whole movie works as a whole, but it's got humorous bits, and I always love Peter O'Toole's always really great. Daryl Hannah's in it. Liam Neeson is the ghost, one of the ghosts in it, which is kind of fun. Yes, he's squishy and weird. So it's entertaining, but the double bill that I advocate more is the other one they're putting out, Love at First Bite with George Hamilton and Once Bitten. I hadn't seen Love at First Bite since I was a kid, and quite frankly, I always confuse George Hamilton with Anthony Perkins, especially in this movie, because they look very similar. And in this movie, he's got the same kind of mole on his lip that Anthony Perkins had, and it almost seems like he's kind of playing.
He's got the best tan though.
It's as if Perkins had a tan and was trying to play Dracula and had that sort of dry sense of humor. It was a lot funnier than I remember, but at the same time, late 70s, so it's a little dated.
Right.
Once Bitten, however, with Jim Carrey, I still love.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Still really funny movie. Definitely of its time, but really hilarious. And I feel like that's a good double bill. And of those two double features, that's the one I recommend. Also, just added to Netflix Instant was the Town That Dreaded Sundown remake,
which I loved.
I really liked it a lot. I don't want to. I don't give it a full endorsement, but it's really good.
Imagine if it had a good ending. If
Yeah,
that film had
again,
a killer ending, it probably would have been.
And
like
here's the funny thing: in
Kramer.
terms of quote unquote remakes, this is the way you do it because I like that it was actually a sequel remake. They actually hit a lot of that's the fun thing is the movie exists within this movie, and they're hitting the beats from the movie because you know what I mean. They're trying to recap.
No, it's a very intelligent retooling, reimagining.
Very much so, and I thought it was a very effective slasher. It had a lot of really good gags and stuff.
Motel kills are really intense.
The cinematography was amazing.
Cinematography is great, and I don't even say this is a complaint. The two things that bothered me about the movie, which is why I can't fully endure it, I really like it a lot, but I think the actors, considering the writing, the actors are really good looking to be saying, oh, he never talked to me because I'm not good looking. I'm like, this lead actress is one of the hottest people I've ever seen. I don't buy her as a nerd that the jockey guy doesn't want to talk to. Those are just little nitpicks, that. But more importantly, I'd heard, and this is all just rumor and gossip, but I'd heard the director had a really difficult time making this film, and then maybe he didn't see eye to eye with all the producers. Blumhouse was involved. A lot of different people
I heard a little
involved
bit
in
about the history, the setting of the historical historical clothing. Like the director wanted the clothing to be like of a period,
Which
even
it
though it's
is.
second, which it
Yeah.
is. But Jason didn't want that. And
Well, you know what, you hear something like that, and of course your initial reaction as a movie fan and a horror fan is like, oh, well, fuck that. The director has his vision. You should let him be a director. But watching the movie, it's a little too stylized, meaning every single shot was trying to be this weird thing and all that. And I was like, all I could think of while watching it was like, you must be a real pain in the ass director to work with. And it makes sense because he's from American Horror Story. He directed a lot of those. This is his directorial debut as a feature. And I feel like that's what it is. It's like, oh, it's your first movie. You're going to go all out.
Right.
But at the same time, a good thing about being a debut feature filmmaker is showing a little restraint. And that's the thing. If you rewatch the movie, there is no restraint. Every shot is trying to be
remember that.
weird
I had
and
issues with
stylized.
that.
And I'm like, all right, that's cool. But, don't do it the whole movie.
well, if the camera becomes the star of the film,
Exactly, and
which
it's like,
is what the problem.
and that becomes distracting when you're watching it. Because I was really into the movie in general. So my only complaint is it's maybe a little too stylized, but it's still good. And again, the ending definitely feels tampered with.
It
although
felt
I was
like
still
Scream
fine with
3
it
or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I put in my review of it, which I think is still up on the Fango site, that the clothing threw me off at first because because the film is cutting back and forth between so many different time frames where it's going from the old movie to the actual events that took place to the people
Which
in
is
the
what
town.
he wanted, right? A blurring
Yeah.
of the time periods.
And so,
between them.
I mean, he was pushing for it, but then there's this scene where you see this girl walking through an airport in this 60s outfit, and then she picks up a Marine, and they go to this incredibly 60s looking hotel, and I was just like, when the fuck are we? I don't even know.
That was confusing, that part.
And then there was a scene where the main girl was talking to her grandmother in a kitchen, and everything in the kitchen was like so 1950s.
I think another idea was that because of those murders, this town hadn't been able to progress to a modern day town. So conceptually, there are a lot of things that are interesting that don't maybe work on screen. It's like, oh, cool idea. It doesn't translate.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
it was a cool concept, but if I had not, we saw it at Beyond Fest, Elric and I did, and we were sitting there staring at the screen. So when you're staring at the screen and not looking away, it was easy to go, wait, when are we? Okay, wait, I guess this is modern day and they just dress weird. Cool, got it. But if I had been watching like I usually do, where I'm at home on my couch with my cell phone and work and baby screaming in the background, I would have completely missed it and been like, I don't know what's going on and when we are.
So you had a flashback or something. Yeah, no, but it is. It's got some great kills, and we keep talking about the reinvention. We're all waiting to see what the next reincarnation of the slasher film will be, because it will happen. It just will take some genius to kind of
and it won't be anything we could imagine. Like,
exactly. But I feel like this
whoa.
was close, and the actual kills and the ferocity of it is dead on.
Yeah.
It's just it fell right back into what Scream had already been doing at the end, and is really disappointing.
Yeah.
These endings where it's just like, and it's XYZ. It's like, okay, I don't care. You didn't build it up. I don't care.
Yeah. That's how I felt. There was.
I'd rather mystery. I'd actually rather watch a movie like that, and I don't find out who it was.
Yeah.
And it leaves you hanging. And it's,
that's what the power of the original story is, that you don't know. And the same thing with the original movie.
Yeah.
So that was that. Check it out on Netflix Instant and let us know what you think. Last but not least, because I'm anxious to get to our guests, and this is, I think, a good segue. I saw Digging Up The Marrow, the new flick from Adam Green, and also one that I know a lot of our listeners are looking forward to.
Where did you see this film?
Well, because Icons of Fright was able to get a screener of it.
Through Icons,
so it was, BJ wrote the review of it for Icons. I checked it out for here. Let me just preface this by saying, obviously Adam Green is a good friend of mine. I absolutely love his first couple of movies. I love what he did with Hatchet. I thought it was a really fun movie for the time being. I think Spiral's an even better movie and a complete left turn. And I really loved Frozen. I thought that was
Frozen's
a really
cool.
solid.
Yeah, I like Frozen.
I really
cool
liked
one.
the direction that his films are going in with those. This film, unfortunately, I don't like it very much. And the reason being is because, going into it, I didn't have much expectation. I just knew that it was supposed to be very different, because it's a collaboration between him and the artist, Alex Pardee, who's an amazing, amazing artist. Scott Reynolds is a big fan of his and has given me pieces of his original artwork. So you think okay, so they're going to do something that's sort of mockumentary, but with an artist creating monsters based on his artwork. Like, that's the basic gist that I got going. And I'm like, all right, that's interesting. But the problem with it is, and he'll probably argue with me about this, but it's set up exactly like a found footage movie. And as we're going to discuss a little bit later with other found footage movies, I don't like found footage movies unless there's a really interesting gimmick. The biggest problem is he plays himself. And I don't understand the point of it. Meaning, all right, if you're going to approach a movie and be like, all right, we're going to make this as real as possible because I'm a real person. So I want to confuse and convince the audience that they're watching blur the line and watch a real thing. The problem with that, I mean, I'm all for that. I'm like, great. Problem is, 5 minutes into the movie, the main character is Ray Wise, and I'm immediately out because I'm like, well, I know all of you guys.
The real Ray Wise?
Yes, but he's not playing Ray Wise. He's playing a character. So to me, it's like he's a guy that believes in monsters. So within 5 minutes, I'm like, all right, well, you set up a real world, but that's Ray Wise. I'm not going to believe anything from this moment forward because that's Ray Wise.
You could not suspend your disbelief.
I couldn't, and it made it really difficult for me. So I didn't understand if that was the intent or what. But for me, in terms of being a found footage movie, it didn't work for me. And the same kind of things. There's cool monster designs and a cool idea, but I couldn't get behind it. And there's not a lot of the monsters that I wanted to see, not nearly as much as I would have wanted. It was just really hard for me to get into it because I couldn't, that line that was being blurred.
Is it a comedy horror or is it a horror horror?
I didn't find it funny. I think it's supposed to be, but I don't know. But then again, look, if you're a fan of Holliston, because I feel like this is almost an extension, or because they're him and Joe are playing very loose versions of themselves on that show. So I feel like this is more in line with those versions of the characters than the real guy that I know, that we know in real life. So if maybe it was like an extension of what Holliston was supposed to be and they were going for humor, but I didn't find the humor because they seriously want you to go into this premise believing that this guy believes in monsters. So it's really weird. At the end of the day, for me, it didn't work. But, if you like Holliston and his other stuff, it's definitely an attempt to do something different with found footage. But just not the sort of thing I like. And again, when we get into the subject, I'm very, very picky with this. I have 3 movies that I think are like perfect found footage movies.
Oh, wow.
And everything else is just
Did we just go to war with the movie crypt? Has this just sparked?
Has the gauntlet been thrown?
No.
Well, you should have followed up by saying, but Everly was fantastic.
And I haven't seen it yet, and I'm dying to see that.
I actually have heard nothing bad from anyone about Everly.
Yeah,
Everyone who sees it like, this
it.
is so bad, have some fun. So that could really create a Beatles-esque rift. All competition of podcasting
I doubt it.
On our home
They
network.
don't have to like every article I write. I don't care.
know, that's fair.
So that's fun. But all right, so let's take a break and we'll bring our guests in.
Ooh.
So we're back, and we've been wanting to do the found footage topic for a really long time, and then this is a film that kind of, I don't want to say it came out of nowhere because we'd heard about it quite a bit, but it's probably the one film of last year, 2014, that had the best word of mouth in terms of...
But in a way, it does come out of nowhere because we usually follow festival circuits or theatrical. So if you skip both of those, that is kind of nowhere. So when something becomes a Netflix star, which to us, it kind of became like one of those, this is like the key. I think it often shows up first in some of my cues. So clearly it was getting heat on the on the streaming. That is kind of like coming out of nowhere, though.
That is true.
You know what I mean?
That is true.
Because there was no festival, but I hadn't heard of it through festivals.
We're usually on top of these things, but I didn't hear about it. And then a lot of our listeners, we spend the first 20, 30 minutes talking about what we've seen, and a lot of them like, have you guys seen this movie yet? So we're like, oh, okay.
And we did for a long time.
Mine wasn't. Usually when I'm trying to do my end of the year wrap up, like the last 3 weeks, like November and December area, I'm like watching a film every night trying to keep up with everything that I missed so that I can do my top 10 of the year. And this was one that somebody was like, oh, you have to watch this one if you're doing your end of the year wrap. And I was like, oh, okay.
We are talking about the Taking of Deborah Logan, and with us is the director, Adam Robitel.
Hey, guys.
And co-writer. And the other co-writer, Gavin Heffernan.
Hi, how you doing?
Welcome. Wow.
Wasn't it called The Taking at some point?
Yeah, it was.
Just The Taking?
I think Dean Koontz kind of beat us to the punch with that. No, there's a couple of legal reasons why we had
I do love that, though. I almost want to think about it with that title. I like
The
that
Taking.
title. Especially when you then know what the movie's about. You're like, no, that's a good title.
Yeah,
it works with the name, too. But.
It was a loss to have to, extend it. I know Gavin had some great umbrage. The Taking of Deborah Logan does not flow trippingly from your tongue. So
yeah, I think that we wanted to try and find something that I guess that was set up that it was different, as well. But so I think when you see that title, you start to suggest, oh, maybe this is just like sort of all the other ones.
Haunting of Georgia.
Well, I mean,
it was a reaction to all the singular title words, which were everywhere. And I mean, it was funny because James Wan, after he congratulated us in a private message, he's like, "Yeah, I would have totally taken your movie, but your title's too long."
Gotta have something like Insidious or Sinister.
Just one word.
Just one word.
But then let's start there because I want to talk a little bit about how this movie came together. And the first thing is, of course, the title. So originally it was called The Taking, and then it became The Taking of Deborah Logan. And then the irony being is that, there's a lot of kind of possession type of movies in that realm that have that title. Like
Possession of Michael King,
Yes.
the Eleanor Rigby, or not Eleanor Rigby.
That's the Beatles song.
No, I know. That's why it's not that. But there was something that Eleanor Rimbauer?
Something like that.
Okay,
there are a lot of titles.
Yeah, there's a lot of titles like that.
The
That was the
Exorcism
sort
of
thing.
Emily Rose.
Yeah.
I also wanted a title that could sound like a documentary, and that felt like it had some credibility in the documentary space. And I think that there was a The Forgetting was a documentary about Alzheimer's, so it was sort of in that vein of like, but then people were like, well, taking it? Like, how is she? So there was some confusion in what that meant, but it felt like and I did want to separate from the exorcism movies because, there's no real Catholic imagery in the movie other than the priest who says, we don't really.
Could have been why I liked it, because I feel like that cycle has just gone. The Catholic priest cycle. For one, it's also we're in a very different culture. From when Exorcism was made, but also I feel like when they're found footage, they just don't feel believable. So that might be one of the elements in your film that just it feels a little fresher. It feels well defined. It's a documentary, and I think one of my big failings with found footage when we're coming up with the show is like how to legitimize why I'm watching this.
Right.
Like why is the camera still rolling? Why do these people not put the camera down? So by creating like such an interesting structure and a subject, I guess, which is the high point of your film, is a great subject and a great performance by the subject who's slowly suffering from Alzheimer's,
Yeah.
And the film I was stuttering to get out is Diary of Ellen Rimbauer. Got it.
Diary.
Okay, moving on.
Noted.
I thought you were going to say The Diary of Anne Frank for a second. Wow.
I just
go
can't
way back.
remember the name of that one.
Website.
It's totally a possession film.
Right. Should never been.
It really is, actually.
So what about putting the story together? Because, one of the things that we discuss is because, especially as of the last couple of years, it almost seems like you come in with a great pitch or a great story and they're like, well, can you make it found footage? Like that's the thing. So was that always the intent? Was that the way that it got made, or how did it become this?
Yeah, it was definitely the intention. I mean, first of all, I've been trying to, I wanted to very consciously start in a grounded sort of medical documentary and then turn it on its head and turn it into a monster movie. It was always the initial conceit of the idea. I'd always been terrified of Alzheimer's, and I'd tried different hybrid versions of ways into the movie that were, you would dip into scripted, and it never quite gelled until I started talking to Gavin about it and sort of pitching him one day in a car. And to me, it was just, if you could ground it and validate why they're filming in the beginning, and then slowly have it become a roller coaster ride, it just felt like it would be inherently far scarier, if you could believe in the world. And, look, the ship has sailed. We're not, maybe there was a period with Blair Witch where, I remember seeing Blair Witch before, like, it had gone wide, and just a friend had put it in the VHS tape. And it was like there was that one moment where you kind of would, but for us, it's like we knew that nobody's ever going to actually believe this is real. I mean, that ship has sailed. So, but if you can capture the reality and the verisimilitude as much as possible and have great performances, it just helps you kind of buy in a little bit more.
Yeah, that was kind of the exciting, because he kind of pitched it to me in the car. We were working on another project, and it was, I think we knew that even then there was a backlash to found footage and people were really resistant to it. But I think what was most exciting was just that there was a real legitimate reason to start filming and to keep filming, even though as it evolves out of Alzheimer's, it's still a subject that they would continue filming and that they would continue on the evolution of this journey. And so suddenly it just seemed very exciting.
Well, and the best thing about it is you also have guys who literally go, no, fuck this, I'm out.
Yeah,
I don't
and
think
they
I've ever
leave.
seen that in a found footage. I think people always say, hey, I'm going to
Yeah.
fire if you don't keep filming. Okay. But
People
in yours,
really
it's like, no,
reacted to
I'm
that.
done. See ya.
We couldn't
I love
believe
that,
like how
but-
many people pointed that out too, because
It's genius,
didn't seem like that shocking of an idea to us.
Right.
So it just seemed like this
real.
is credible
Yeah.
and funny and real, and but so many people were just like, oh my god, somebody leaves in the movie.
It was honest. It was like an honest reaction versus, so
I think, by grounding a lot of this in what would feel real.
Wait,
to the
also,
people, it really makes
there's
it
that
work.
one scene, forgive if I paraphrase it wrong, but when they go to the doctor and she's just like, look, she vomited out worms or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, that's not normal.
Right.
And I was just like, yes, because usually it's like that whole like Eddie Murphy skit where like, that's peculiar.
Right. The thing when we did research, though, to take it back to Alzheimer's, is a lot of this is really great, grounded in reality. I mean, some of the hallucinations that they'll have. I mean, there was one clip that we watched where a woman was convinced that there were spiders coming up her leg, and it's so scary.
Did you guys? I mean, that must have been like really freaky to research.
It
At
was
least I would have
freaky.
been freaked out.
It
to
was.
It
research
was
that.
freaky. In fact, in going back to the genesis of the idea, I had stumbled upon some early research of a woman who had early onset Alzheimer's, like the movie Still Alice that's playing now.
Julianne Moore.
A young woman, her maybe in her early 50s, and I showed Brian Singer this footage because at first she was in mid-stage disease and she's talking about losing her mind, and she's very elegantly trying to stave off her memory loss, and she's writing notes and she's doing all these things to try to stave off the progression. And then it cuts to her 2 years later, and there's this profound change in her physically. She's as white as this chair. She's going from anger to fear to, hostility, all in the breath of 10 seconds. Doesn't recognize anybody, and I was just like, that is so frightening in and of itself. And I knew.
Is it John Denver who sings the song "I Am a Lineman" for the county? Who's that one? That famous.
I don't think it's John.
There's a documentary
I'm looking at it.
this
Going
year
on her
that
phone.
came out about it's one of those major musicians, and he's suffering Alzheimer's. And Glenn Campbell. That's
Right,
what it
yeah.
is.
That's it.
Campbell.
And it follows him for this year of touring, and it just sounds unbelievable because throughout the process, he forgets that there's a camera crew following him.
Oh my
He
God.
has to be reminded.
This is a
constantly.
documentary?
Yeah, it
It's-
came out this year. It's meant to be
Oh my
really
God.
good.
The
It was
song
okay,
is Wichita Lineman.
Oh my
Wichita
God.
Lineman.
Glenn
But he
Campbell.
goes
Well
through. Apparently it's a very brave portrait of a guy on his
Wow.
last tour, and
Wow.
he keeps he'll go out on stage and probably forget that he's in front of an audience, and then has to kind of keep going. And
What's interesting you say that is there was also a clip in one of the research videos we watched where a man who was late stage disease, who had really didn't recognize his daughter, but then they put him up in an a cappella group, and suddenly his entire memory came back, and he was
wow.
able to sing these
Wow, so
songs.
triggers
So
It was
that help.
deeply planted
Yeah.
there somewhere else. That was fascinating.
Yeah, music in particular is like a very strong. There's a music documentary about this, about rediscovering memory through music. I
Yeah.
forget the name of it though, but
were you guys fans of any? Were there any besides Blair Witch? Were there any found footage films that you had identified and go, no, but this can work? To convince yourself that because there are some. We're going to talk about lists later of good found footage, and were there elements that don't work, and you're like, we have to avoid these fucking pitfalls when we write this film,
Well, yeah, I think that it was more a question of kind of pieces of films. There were pieces that we saw that worked. I mean, Blair Witch was definitely one that we watched. I think I know for me, I feel like that's one of the most credible ones in terms of logic and why it's being set up. And we watched them all pretty much and really just sort of tried to.
Wait, you watched Gacy House?
Almost
I
all.
saw
Don't need to
that
watch Gacy House.
when I was
I don't think
researching
that
today.
was
That was number 2 on somebody's top 10.
Wow.
Someone
My friend
loves
produced
it.
that. It is
Okay.
not a good.
Someone
I
loves
guess I
it.
shouldn't say we watched all of them.
Okay,
You guys
okay.
probably watched all of them.
no.
We
One
watched
of-
all the big ones.
One of the aesthetic conversations we had really early, and this was really Gavin driving this, was anytime the movie gets Hollywood or expositional, dirty up the frame, make it as, for example, when Deborah and Sarah are talking about needing this film crew to come into their house, let's see it through a window with subtitles,
that
and
was good.
just really make it feel earned and not Hollywood. And that's the trick, is to find those sort of stolen moments that aren't perfectly well
Did you
shot.
ever consider mixing it? So some would be found footage, and then other parts would be.
there were, like I said, early iterations of that,
right.
and it was only when Gavin and I started to spitball that I figured out a way, an alchemy of, and the metaphor is just, setting up a roller coaster, and you get to the top of the hill, and then it turns into a monster movie, and if the first half can feel really clinical, and the second half, get into the more expressionistic horror, that was always the intent.
I think across the board, everyone thinks you had one of your last moments. If for those who haven't seen it, we won't ruin it. It's probably the best horror image of last year.
It was.
I mean, really quite terrifying.
Someone actually asked me in an interview, I think it was on an NPR show, asked me what the best imagery of 2014 horror film was, and I said the last 10 minutes of Taking of Deborah Logan.
God bless you.
Know it's coming because lately, and especially at the end of the year, people are using it as a screen grab. Which really
I know it's become a GIF.
Terrible. It's become a GIF, and honestly, and I mean, maybe there's an advantage to that because people see that and they're like, oh, what the fuck is that? But when I was watching the movie, because you do not expect that to come. I had
no idea that was coming.
Because it's treated so realistically.
That's neat.
No way.
It's funny because we were just earlier today. We're working on another movie, and we had some downtime, and we just saw that ISIS video of the guy being set on fire, and it was so fucking disturbing. And we've crossed the Rubicon in terms of the images that are available to us on a finger's grasp away, and so for horror to work, it has to be in context. And for that image, the reason it pops so much is because you've sort of believed in the world the whole way.
Right.
And then it's by the time you get to that point, you're not expecting it, but when it happens, you sort of believe it,
I almost felt like the human body could do that if somebody was really suffering. It could do that.
That's it can, but it was all practical. So we just did it.
Context is perfect because again, when you're just the things that are the most scariest are that when you can't believe what you're seeing.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like if you just see it as a quick image or like a GIF or whatever, you're like, oh, that's an effect or something. That's
right.
Cool. But you're invested in this world and going along, and you don't expect anything like that to happen.
Well,
so
plus,
that's why.
I mean, from a horror perspective, I usually watch 4 to 5 horror films a week just for work alone. I know these guys probably do as well. I've never fucking seen that before.
Yeah. That's neat.
Good job.
We've seen Freddy do things like that.
Sure.
It's a joke. So it's not the same thing.
No, that was the fun, and that was even on the page. It was, to some people, it was a fairly tough sell because it was kind of like jamming 2 movies together that really almost should belong in different spaces. It was a monster movie mixed with a sort of very sobering documentary. But that was the fun for us, was that if you really make you try to believe that these are real people, that it's really happening to them, and then show them this unbelievable monster image, that hopefully that the ride works that extra well. But,
was it a hard film to finance to get made? But also wondering if that also the deal impacted how you did end up being a film that for us came out of nowhere instead of having a traditional.
Yeah,
route.
I mean, I look, any film's hard to finance.
Right,
unfortunately or unfortunately, but once Brian got on board, like I pitched it, I showed him that clip that I told you about the woman with the early onset, and I knew his sort of just complete fear of anything medical, and so he once he got on board, it became apparent to me that I'd be able to raise the money. But it was still a long process, and we went through many drafts, and Bad Hat Harry, those guys were really great at helping us develop the script, and it was a good year of writing, just kind of constantly going back to the well.
I think the initial conceit was that we were going to kind of try and just have an outline and then go and just discover it and find it. And thank God we kind of got talked out of that, because by sort of really walking through the development phase and picking out a lot of the pitfalls, we were able to make it a lot better and still give Adam the flexibility to improv and find moments on the set, but without chasing your tail at the same time.
Yeah, it was true. I mean, you have 20 days to make a movie, and I just, you see it a lot with these smaller movies where they get lost and they don't have a finished cut by the end, and they're trying to get finishing funds. And it was like, it's a Herculean effort. You're going through 6, 7, 8 pages a day sometimes, and if you don't have that spine, and thank God, because it really is. It's about the script, and don't start until you're ready. And even on the day, like I would deviate a lot, and then Gavin would pull me back to like, okay, well, what's the story? You know, like what scene are we shooting? I mean, I remember there was one day where like fire engines came, and like I was like, let's go shoot that. And it was like, all right, well, that has nothing to do with the fucking script we wrote.
They still made it in the movie though, so they were like legit North Carolina firefighters that showed up for like a fire alarm. I think it was just like something had gone off in one of these empty buildings, and so literally just picked the cameras up and shot. And it ends up being in the movie as like briefly there's 4 or 5 fire trucks in front.
But you know, in terms of where we came out of nowhere, like, you know, I really can't speak to what their strategy was. I mean, at a certain point as the director, you're just, you know, your movie goes away and like it happened. The people that are more important than you sort of do stuff with it, and like you watch it like a child on the street with like, you know, raincoat in the rain. And
you didn't do festivals at all, right?
We tried to get into Toronto, and we didn't get into TIFF, and that was, you know, sad. But once we didn't get into TIFF, I think we just, you know,
it looked like a Fantastic Fest. Had that played at Fantastic Fest, I think it would have connected.
We you know, got a nice message from them, and I think Roger Avery was a friend of mine. She like tried, you know, we tried, you know, but it didn't happen. And I had also, you know, just to be completely candid, you know, we had an early test screening, and that was painful because the movie wasn't finished. We didn't have the money shot. There was a terrible sound mix, and it was one of the most excruciating 90 minutes of my life, frankly. And then what happens is, you know, and part of the way we financed the movie is we had to turn it around really, really quickly. And specifics of the deal I won't get into, but I had like 6 weeks to show a first cut, and you know, Gavin and I we edited it ourselves, and it was just an obscene amount of footage to have to go through and try to compile a cut. And so we, you know, show the cut, and then we screen it, and it just was way too premature. I needed at least another 4 weeks to get to a place where the movie should have been shown. So we have the test screening, and then they give you these 30 pages of this tome of like how your movie sucks and will not fucking perform.
My God, that would have crushed me.
Oh, dude, I mean, after 2 years, I mean, I was literally like, you know, reading Nietzsche, and you know, but and then I went through a period of like, okay, I'm abandoning this. This sucks. I suck. I'm never, you know, and so that was the nadir. And then once it starts to come out, and I don't know why they dumped it to Netflix immediately, but in some ways, in retrospect, it really helped us because it opened a lot of people saw it immediately.
Became accessible everywhere.
I think that was the fun thing about it
too.
Most people that came to us and told us about it were like, this movie should have been in
theaters. Yeah, it's instant streaming. We don't know why. We didn't see it anywhere else.
But I think that actually can help. And I think in the way that, you know, Blair Witch or paranormal, and especially with horror, I think it's that genre where if people see something that they're interested in or that's new or fresh or special, they will pick up the phone and call their friends and say, you got to see it, or they'll send them.
I definitely would not have watched it had it not been word of mouth, because there's quite a few on my Q&A, The Den, and there's a few others that I look at the picture and I go, maybe, but it'll take somebody pushing me.
It's that kind of genre.
Pushers. We had a bunch of people.
Because it wasn't on the side of buses.
Right,
I think that's if you had it on like, you know, the side of a bus or the side of a building, it's not quite the same. And maybe more people would have seen it, but it's not that extra incentive for people to really tug on the shirt sleeve.
That's a good
say,
question. I wonder if more people saw Devil's Due, which had a big budget to promote, or your film. I would almost bet
I know
that probably more people, because I don't know many horror fans who actually went to Devil's Due, and once bad word of mouth hits first weekend, then no one goes. So I wonder that whereas on Netflix you just keep coming and you keep going, and it still shows up high in mine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was just before Halloween as well, so that was really well timed. It came out like about, I guess, 10 days before Halloween, so everyone was really, you know, hunkering down to watch their Halloween movies. And I mean, I think like what Adam's kind of speaking to is the process we kind of went through almost every imaginable emotion on this movie, literally from, you know, exhilaration, you're the king of the world, to nothing, to, you know, it's over, our careers, like literally every single emotion you can think of. And so by the time it came out, we were just like, well, okay, it's dumped, you know, at least let's move on and go into something else. And then over the days and the weeks, it was just like this reaction we couldn't even have ever imagined.
Welcome to the
beautiful
boys.
It's all downhill from here.
About your movie.
Give me another Coors Light.
So did you say that you guys, I mean, it was clearly East Coast. Did you say it was shot in North Carolina?
Yes, it was Charlotte.
Nice.
Charlotte,
How'd you guys pick the location, or was that just like
just
good
the math
tax deal?
Yeah, it was a good tax deal, and it turned out to be great. I would shoot every movie in Charlotte if I could, and I know
Charlotte's a gorgeous city.
it is. In fact, when there was an exodus of crew because everybody was going, I think, to Georgia, and because the tax situation was changing, and so they were losing a lot of business, which really kind of made me sad because it's a lot of work for people. And
North Carolina actually used to be like a kind of a hot area of filming because in the 90s, because Dawson's Creek was shot there. Like I visited the Dawson's Creek
Homeland
set.
is shot there,
Yeah.
and Banshee, and
they have a good film school down there. I remember.
do they?
Yeah, it's not in Charlotte though, but it's the North Carolina. David Gordon Green and all those guys went there.
Wilkins.
It's in a small.
It's a smaller town. But I remember my parents trying to convince me to go there because I'm from Virginia, and they were like, "Don't go away for film school. This is."
Are you from Eczema, Virginia?
Eczema?
That's the fictitious place in our movie. But
I remember that now. I remember being like,
somebody named it after a skin disease.
People are like looking it up. They're like, this isn't a real town, guys. It's like,
So were the people who put your film out happy with the Netflix response? Like, is that...
they've been very Vulcan or neutral about, like, I have no information. I really don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
we go on Twitter to find out.
It's
how
opening in
doing.
theaters in different foreign countries. We have no idea. So,
it's in the Netherlands right now. And then it's
the
opening
Dutch hate it.
I think
it's like they're mad because
we have one fan in
right.
Netherlands. Let me talk to them.
And what else?
Exactly.
They Philippines
what about Japan?
now. Or I don't know about Japan. I know on February 11th, it's I believe the Philippines. It's opening there. So we see these kind of funny posters. That one I think is "Say hello to the grandma from hell." Is the tagline.
I hope it has a good poster
That's
to
the
it
Ghana
too.
poster,
Or good art with that.
Oh, I love
Arnold
those.
Schwarzenegger on it.
Well, there's been some really cool fan art as well. That's just another fun thing. Just all this kind of fun bonuses that we never really expected, but actual fan art of people doing these incredible drawings, and it's this new world now where you can connect to people in a way like never before, and you can have your finger on the pulse of a movie like never before. And so it's as much you get humbled as well because you'll be like, look, these three people say it's the greatest movie ever made, and the fourth one's like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
You actually had a good analogy, which is because as a people pleaser and like the best little boy in the world, you want everybody to love your movie, but you had a good analogy, which was like politicians. If 50% of the populace likes you're doing well, and the same goes with movies. It's binary, and for whatever reason you love something, I might hate it, and so it's so subjective.
That just summed up our relationship. Right there. That's us.
Oppositional, that we both liked this movie, so I don't know how that happened. Well, we also came on today's show to kind of look at a lot of the flaws of found footage, which we will in a second. So it's just amazing.
Before that,
well, I'm just saying that it's amazing that we're here highlighting one we like.
Yes, it would have been awkward if we.
No, of course.
Right.
We don't just hate
As soon as we leave, then
But even in anthologies and stuff with, say, the VHS anthologies, it'll be like, oh, one great story and two bad ones, but I still walk away going, at least that one was good. You know what I mean? And it's so, I guess we've grown to expect less.
The bar is lower.
I think you guys hurdled over that, which is interesting. I don't know.
That's great.
It's unique.
I mean, like to be
especially in such a saturated market. Because I mean, if I look at what pops up at my Amazon listing, if you like blank, you will like blank. So much of it is found footage, and so much of it makes me kind of throw up in my mouth a little bit. So.
That's
a lot of that was Bryan Singer as well, where he was very much like the logic police. Like it was just like if we tried to slip anything, I'm sure there's some logic bends in the movie, but I mean, if we really tried to just be like, oh no, they won't call the police here, or they wouldn't do that. He'd give us the death stare, you know what I mean? And he'd basically look down at us, and we'd be like, okay, we'll go work on it. And so that was helpful. As frustrating as it was at the time, what we realized was it just was constantly making it better and constantly kind of trying to make it as bulletproof as possible, which I think makes it scarier. You get taken out of the movie if you're like, they would never stay in that house, or they would never do this or that. So we're always trying to play to the logic as much as possible.
And I love that you guys use a tripod. I mentioned this earlier on the show. That's my biggest gripe about found footage is when it comes to something like As Above, So Below, which I talked about before on the show. I love the plot. I absolutely love the setup. I think it's great. It's like national treasure for horror. But that movie gave me the worst headache and just made me not want to watch it. It was like a chore.
Interesting.
You guys used a tripod.
Well,
so good.
They're filmmakers, right?
And my DP was very much of the aesthetic, and Andrew, Hoopshire. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Wapeshire, Hoopshire. I always pronounce it Hoopshire. I think he can correct me tomorrow. But it was always that happy medium between Dramamine inducing, seasickness and like, let's make a movie that looks good on a big screen. At the same time, I will say in the third act, like I had to hide certain situations and certain sets that we were recycling the same little mind space over and over again. So it just sort of lent itself to having to cut and do all those kind of frenetic things. But that's kind of what you expect in the wreck element of the movie.
But you built up to it. You weren't shooting that way from the start.
Right. And your money shot was still framed. That's the important
I know.
thing.
I got really still on that. I was like, let's let it see it. Yeah. So, and speaking to one of the core issues for found footage is that shaky sort of thing. And people, it's, the barrier is so low and the barrier to entry to make a found footage movie is lower. So it's seductive to think, let's go make a shaky camera movie. And that's one of the reasons why most of them suck.
And there definitely are movies where the shaky aesthetic works. I mean, even if we're going back to like Cannibal, Holocaust, I mean, it's definitely got that kind of I'm running, but I'm filming thing going on through a lot of it. But yeah, But
that one was shot on film, so it also had some other believable quality to it because you could feel the film running through the gate like it's going to run out at some point, and that's when the film ends. Whereas with video, one thing I've noticed about found footage lately is the higher quality the video, the less I believe what I'm watching. And the lower fi and the more degraded, the more I'm able to just get lost in it. I feel like some of the ones where it's, I think, Afflicted, which is a very well-crafted movie. Like, I thought it was actually a really good recent found footage film. But it almost looks too good. It looks so clean that I stop believing what I'm seeing. Whereas when somebody's shooting, I've got this high-8 camera and I'm going into going on my camping trip, there's something about it that you can get lost in, which is, it's the opposite of what you want from a movie, quality.
Yeah.
And yet somehow it's more immediate. I just, before you guys came on, I was talking about Rec 4, and I've just saw it a couple of days ago, and, it's not found footage. It's the first time I've missed found footage ever in my life, where I was like, I wish that had been found, because it didn't work. Not found footage. And the one thing I realized, it's because of the immediacy. So when zombies are running at me, that's just running at the frame, and this is a traditional. Right. Whereas when Rec 1 and 2, you feel like very close with them. The camera's close, they're running at you, you are the camera.
Right.
You're positioned, you have nowhere else to go. I always think you're kind of captured in a frame with the camera operator, which is interesting.
Well, it's also the way that audiences have evolved, because in the last decade or two, again, we were saying people are so accustomed to YouTube and making their own things and reality television and playing. I mean, I remember
fun videos.
Video games. The first time I sat in with my friend when he played the first Resident Evil, like I was like, "What's happening? They're coming out. I don't understand this." So it's like you have to imagine that there's 10 years of that's how people are getting their information, through first person, through things coming at them, through YouTube, to reality television. So that's why,
so true.
We were saying like found footage, even though it technically means footage that was found, it's become an aesthetic. So, anything that's like a documentary fits into found footage.
Right.
The definition has kind of been blurred. People say Cannibal Holocaust. I don't buy that, because it's more movie than quote unquote found footage. Like, I remember when Blair Witch came out, there was of course the purists are like, Cannibal Holocaust did it first. I'm like, yeah, they did a version of that.
But they blurred the line. They made people believe that the stuff that was found
was real.
Legit, because they
but
blurred the line.
That's been done before
so
too. I mean, not in horror, but I mean, you can go back to like one of the original, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but it is one of the original like found footage films, and it was a documentary about, and it was released in Britain. I think it was on the BBC. I want to call it the Pasta Harvest, but it was about supposedly about how in Italy they actually grew pasta on trees and plucked it down, and they showed this on the BBC, and people actually believed it.
Wow!
And we watched it in film school. It was in black and white.
Context is everything, and you were talking about how it's hard to push the boundaries. I remember when I saw The Sacrament, I felt so strongly that if HBO had released that as one of the episodes of Vice, so they show the show Vice every week, they had just put it on that air without any fanfare, I think a lot of people, not us, people who know AJ Bowen, know the actors, a lot of people for at least
would swallow at
least 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Because Saturday Night Live, when Jonestown happened, it interrupted Saturday Night Live, and everyone thought it was a joke. And they interrupted, and they said, we have to break into this. Jonestown, these people have just died from this tragedy. everyone thought it was a joke.
Wow.
And so in a lot of psychology books, I remember
Interesting.
reading that, and I was like, you know what? If you could just have released it like that,
Yeah,
it
because
would
we
fuck some
talk
people
about
up.
that because we
Interesting.
saw the Sacrament theatrically on the big screen, and he came back to me after saying, you know what, that's the one I loved it, but that's the one movie that I
One of the
feel
first
would have
I've ever
worked
seen.
better at home. And I wonder if maybe that's one of the keys to the success of your film is the idea that a lot of people did discover it on Netflix. And you know what I mean? Like, so, like when people are making shorts for YouTube or whatever, for example, you're used to people watching stuff on your phone. I know filmmakers that cater to that. It's like, well, this is a quick YouTube short or whatever. So almost like going for most people watch documentaries at home or things that are set up like that. So I almost feel like that might be I mean, I would have liked to
And
have seen your
often
film on the big screen.
alone, and it's almost
Yes.
like you're creating a one-on-one experience
Yeah,
rather than
exactly.
an audience experience. And one-on-one can be creepier. Yeah, some of the other movies like Paranormal 2, I saw alone at home, and it had more of an impact than any of the other ones. I don't know what it was about it. There was like
Interesting.
surveillance cameras,
Yep.
and you're in the house, and I was alone in the house, and there's something about it that did have a creepy
Interesting.
quality. Had I seen that in theater, I wouldn't have bought a second of it. I would have enjoyed watching other people jump, but I would have been like, whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There might be some. Yeah, you might be onto something about Netflix being a
All right.
direct.
I mean,
yeah.
I would say on the whole, though, still horror is a communal experience.
Yeah,
And
like
you-
comedy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
comedy and
so
horror,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, but, again, it's still the holy grail, at least, you know, and I think the paradigm is changing, and you know, there will be a day when you don't even think about theatrical. If it goes, great, but it's but
Your film would make a great midnight comeback movie now, like in theatrically, like now that people know about it and bring it back, and
There
that'd
you
be
go.
neat, you know.
Pull some strings.
guys have a
We're
print
ready.
of it?
We'll be there.
Yeah,
maybe,
have a print
maybe
of
New
it?
Zealand.
yeah, exactly.
Right. But that's exciting. And I think some of the things we say sometimes is that, 50% of the movie is the person who's watching it and what they
Yeah.
bring to the
Yeah.
experience and what their own fears are. Are they afraid of snakes? Are they afraid of this? Do they have someone in their family who's suffering from a disease? So it's interesting to see how that varies over different people as well. It's funny when you were saying that, I was thinking of War of the Worlds too, the radio show,
Oh, yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
just another example of something where they just did it right by the book, and then all of a sudden everyone thought it was really happening.
And I found it. It was called The Spaghetti Harvest, and it was on BBC in 1957 as an April Fool's joke. And it was supposed to be the Swiss grow spaghettis on trees, because
Wow.
apparently at the time, all of the pasta that came into Britain was canned. And so they didn't really know where it came from.
That's
But that
hilarious.
also reminds me of another BBC show that kind of predates Blair Witch, Ghost Watch.
right.
Which was
I
80s.
read about that.
And it was set up as like a paranormal investigation news show that was supposed to look real. And it's got some pretty terrifying moments in it. It was
Okay.
like early, mid-80s, probably mid-80s.
Yeah, the challenge is hard now because everyone is so cynical and everyone is so in tune to the movies, and I think
We can
that's
look on our phone,
right. And
reviews.
exactly.
I just looked up the
we
Spaghetti
know
Harvest.
we do it all the time where
Yeah.
we'll say like, God, is that real? I don't know. And then 10 seconds
Yeah.
later, it's not. And so you have that extra challenge of kind of cynicism, knowledge.
Right.
People are ahead of the curve. So, but there are still a few people on Twitter who think The Taking of the Deborah Logan is a documentary. I swear to God, there are people that are like, I just saw the most fucked up documentary.
Our target's
ever.
like 18-year-old girls for whatever reason. It's
Right.
like, this is the
Wow.
scariest
Yep.
shit ever. EVA. And
No, I swear to God.
I just watched that Taco Bell, yo, and it's scary.
And they'll say like the different ways they
Yeah.
piss or shit themselves, and then they're like, "And I was the third time I had seen it too," or something.
Wow.
So it's neat. I mean, it's just very unexpected for I think, like Adam said, coming from that sort of low place of being at our sort of lowest emotional
So I guess
point.
that's Netflix, though. I mean, I guess again that's this broad reach because it's not VOD. VOD still is there's still a big barrier because you have to be willing to push a button and say I'm paying $7.
Yeah.
You have to have a credit card, which in itself is like only adults.
Exactly.
One
It's
family
true.
buys the Netflix and all the kids have it, the adults, and
It's on
It's an interesting
YouTube. Like the
reach.
full movie
Oh, it
is
is?
like pops up on YouTube every fucking. There's like four
Right.
people like bragging about
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like the heads of the Hydra. You know,
Actually,
and
I now have a question about VOD and how it works now. Because I know in my family when I was a kid, if I wanted to get something off pay-per-view, which was like our 90s equivalent of VOD, I had to beg my parents to be able to get something off pay-per-view. Like it had to be like a mad
So
wrestling
expensive.
event.
It was
and
crazy
it was like
expensive.
$17.
Yeah.
I wonder if the same thing applies, or do you just like whenever you want, you can get something off? I'm curious now.
It's pretty.
Depends
I
who
mean,
pays the
I
bill.
watch it on my TV, and I have everything like Amazon or whatever. And you usually have to confirm it. Like they ask you for your Amazon password again, and you have several steps to go through. So, I mean, as a kid, I would have memorized all my parents' shit. And
There you
just
go.
Done it, but
I mean, there's
I
no
don't
question
know.
that most people have a Netflix streaming account, and
Yeah.
so that's definitely
The Netflix,
cannibalizes.
yeah,
'Cause
everybody
we're on
has that
iTunes,
one.
we're on Amazon, but I mean, when 300,000 people have watched it on Netflix, it's like that's your market.
And
you
it's
know, so-
because there's no risk. Like they see the picture, oh, that looks right. I'll watch 5 minutes. I'll turn it off otherwise.
Yeah.
And if they're seeing it the whole way through, it means you've done something special because it's so easy to. I mean, that's the only time I turn off movies. Is Netflix because who cares?
I think
The next
that,
one,
that
yeah.
really was a big part of just sort of getting kind of making any name for ourselves, really, because I mean, there was very, very limited marketing to say the least. And so I think just that ability to kind of very quickly have it seen. I mean, it was lit when it went up, I think October 21st, it was like a couple days later, it already had like 200,000 votes on it. Like people not only had seen it, but had rated it and voted it. Wow. So it was just suddenly this, kind of instant awareness in a way, like and now with Twitter and everything like that, it was suddenly this interesting approach. And then I think when it really kicked into gear was when the GIF came out of the sort of the final scene, and so you had this interesting split where half of the people were watching it without knowing that, and then the other half were watching it from the context of that image. And then watching it, in reverse almost. So it was. It's funny because it's probably two different movies for each of those people.
No, it was nice to know nothing as far as possible.
Which company did your distribution?
It was Millennium.
Okay.
Yep. So and then I guess was it Millennium and New Image?
Yeah,
it's Millennium and New Image, and so that's the domestic.
I have a question, a found footage question. Don't jump down my throat all at once. Just out of curiosity. And I'm being honest here because again, this goes into context. But the Blair Witch Project, I loved it when it came out. Does it still hold up if you watch it now? And be honest, and I know our listeners are going to, because I also am a Blair Witch 2 fan, but that's a whole other story.
Oh,
and that's not
I'm a
found
Blair
footage,
Witch
so
2
we're not
fan
gonna
as
talk
well,
about
but you guys know
You
that.
said that out loud.
I did. I like it.
I swear, rewatch it.
And
Book of Shadows.
Surprisingly smart. Rewatch it.
Okay.
Here's why I bring this up because
I was just so confused why such a celebrated documentarian would go and make a scripted movie.
I know.
Like I don't understand the logic of it all.
Well, it
but-
starts out found footage.
it does, and
Blair
actually,
Witch too.
I want to see his director's cut of it, which I know exists in the vaults over at Lionsgate. I just have never been able to get it. But the reason being is because, again, context. I recently rewatched it, not in the last couple of years, and it's it's funny because it's the first of its kind. It's got all the annoying found footage tropes, but then that last 10-15 minutes is pretty solid still.
And the last image.
The last image is great.
Very good. Very
but
strong.
think about it. That was, we were just saying, like, now you watch one of these movies, you tweet about it, you spread the word. That was at that pivotal moment in about 99 where not everybody had a fast internet connection yet, where you could still maintain the illusion that it was like a real thing. I remember all the sites popping up, and people talking about it.
Yeah,
on
the
message
actors couldn't
boards.
go anywhere.
They couldn't
and-
talk
They put
about
flyers
it.
up at my college because I was in Virginia,
Right.
really close to Burkittsville. And so they put up, we're looking for these people flyers about 4
That's
months
cool.
in advance.
Wow.
That'll
So by the
never-
time that the movie came out, we were like, oh shit, it's those kids we've been seeing pictures
cool.
for. And then they were on Letterman 2 nights later and the whole thing was blown.
But
But
my
one of
point
the-
being is they can never do that again. That was a
No,
timing
the ship has
thing.
sailed. Yeah, the ship has sailed.
Because of the way the internet was at that
Right.
time, and I just remember it being a big deal, and you're waiting on a fucking dial-up connection for what's going on in this file.
I'll say personally that having grown up in the woods, that I still watch the movie. It still affects me on a physical and emotional level. But I'll say that they had a companion piece, which was The Curse of the Blair Witch. Did you guys see that at all?
It's like a documentary.
Yeah, it was a 40-minute companion piece that filled out all of the mythology of Elric Kane, and it was so fucking cool. And that had such a huge influence. You ask, what influenced us? The Curse of the Blair Witch had a historical context for the witch. It showed all these old cursive docking slips from when she came over from Ireland, and all these cool illustrations about the crops that were dying, and it filled out the mythology in a way that is similar to what we do in our River Rouge documentary within the movie. And so that was better than the Blair Witch in a way, their companion piece. I
So
think.
much texture, yeah. It was just all this, and all the details of all, he's saying these old slips or another eyewitness account, and it was just so.
It was like Ken Burns
so,
documentary. documentary.
Yeah, very much so.
about
Yeah,
the Blair Witch.
it really was, and it was like it just reinforced that realism in a really exciting way.
Almost in a boring historical kind of way,
Yeah.
like something your teacher would put on. Like, let's watch Ellie Kedward's history.
They
And
just they did a great job, and we watched that. I mean, we watched that a couple times, and Blair Witch right pretty early on, I think from the beginning.
just Heather's performance in that movie is just so real, and she's just she's not acting. She's terrified. You feel it. It's real. The snot. I mean, I feel like snot's always scary. So
taking vanity out of the equation does make it scarier. I think. But,
right. And then they don't look like actors. And I feel this now, even when I was casting my movie, and I see it all the time, like talking about when something is well lit and it feels produced, it's just not scary. And neither are beautiful looking people that are just not real people. And, it was important for me to feel like Sarah was a real person and was an alcoholic who had a mother who had Alzheimer's disease. And that's not our first blush when we're casting a movie, is to let's put a bunch of artificial looking people in a movie, and it's not real.
It's just all about realism. I think that's something we keep coming back to over and over again. Is we just really believe the more realistic it is, the scarier it'll be, and that's why even in our movie there's quite a lot of setup. You really are in the kind of Alzheimer's documentary for 20 minutes before anything scary happens, and a lot of people chafed at that even in the script phase and said, "Well, where are the scares? Where are the scares?"
Although I have to say, Eduardo Sanchez on Facebook, we're friends. He said, "Did Deborah Logan jump the shark?" 16 minutes in, he was calling it like the whole bit where she, I think he took umbrage with her pulling her neck, 18 minutes in or whatever. So I guess we jumped the shark to him.
That's
funny.
But we took pride in that.
We did take pride in that.
I haven't seen the Bigfoot movie yet.
Oh, you haven't seen it yet?
I haven't seen it exist yet, no.
Okay.
There's some great stuff in it. Some great
fun.
pieces for sure. Yep.
Well, what about, let's talk really briefly about the casting process of this, because Jill Larson played Deborah Logan, correct? Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's not the type of role that a woman of that age gets that often.
No.
And, the same thing with her daughter, who was Anne Ramsey?
Anne Ramsey,
Yeah,
yep.
I recognized her from Dexter right away, so I was like, oh, I know her.
Mad about you.
Yep. Was there ever any, hey, can you make them younger? Like those kind of discussions, or were you guys okay to make them who they were? Because that's what makes it real, is that they are older people.
Yeah, I mean, the audition process was quite strenuous, and it took a long time. And I always, in my heart, from her first read, knew that she was Deborah. But we did extensively look. I mean, for a little movie, we had offices in New York for a while. We had people in North Carolina, and right down to the wire, literally 3 days before we started shooting, it was still unofficial. And Jill was the only person that we read that was capable of doing both the grandma stuff and then the possession stuff. And she also just quite strikingly physically, she was the iconic woman in the Shutter Island trailer. Mm-hmm. And I knew in my mind as a young filmmaker, like, Scorsese saw something in her physically, and I'm like, all right, there's something there. And she can be beautiful, but then she can also be quite skeletal, and she has an interesting,
She's from a soap, right?
Yeah, she was
All My Children,
like hundreds and hundreds of episodes, right?
Yeah,
but we saw how many women did we see? How much tape? And it was a lot of old women spasming on the ground.
Yeah,
we saw,
convulsing. Like, we could make a great montage tape because there's like literally
epic fucking
going for it.
Gag Trash Humpers.
Exactly. No, it was like
not to name drop, but we had like Dee Wallace, the mom from E.T., come in, and she was like writhing on the floor, and she.
I mean, they really have a lot of effort. It gave me a lot of appreciation for the job of an actor, because I mean, they were just going for it, but I think like what Jill did is she never really did any of that stuff. It was just it was in the eyes, and it was just this sort of very controlled moment where she's a normal person, and then in the middle of the audition, you just see it glaze over. It was just like suddenly like she was literally becoming possessed in front of us, and it was just that kind of chills feeling.
Yeah, she seemed dangerous,
Yeah, that's a great quality.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so to answer your question, like, I ultimately, nobody really interfered. I mean, there were lots of opinions, and particularly for Sarah, there were some opinions that she should be, prettier and sort of, go for the standard lipstick lesbian. Anne Ramsey, I mean, just in terms of being around actors my whole life, I mean, she just is so raw and so fucking real. Like, she's not capable of a false note. She just is not. And
she reminds me of Catherine Keener in that way. Like,
oh,
that kind
dude,
of action.
she's just. I mean, I foresee her winning. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but she just has a lot in her, and And she was, interestingly, we tried to do the Boston accent thing from Boston, and initially the movie was set in Boston, but because the house had a big plantation sort of style, we had to go, oh, fuck, this wouldn't be in New England. So we ended up resetting the movie in Virginia, Eczema. But Anne was not only capable of coming in and blowing us away, but she was the only one who came in and did the Boston accent the right way. Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyway.
And they were both just so focused and driven. They were incredible attitudes top to bottom, because it was a very low budget movie with just every excuse to complain every step of the way. And they were the cheerleaders, really. They were just so excited and so, like I say this all the time, but Jill would kind of be, every day you'd see her kind of like she'd be walking around in blood or earthworms or both or this or that. And I would apologize to her every time I saw her. And then she'd just say, oh, aren't we lucky to be doing this? This is the best, and she's walking around just covered in blood and in a
I don't think she
nightgown.
knows how much she could work in horror if she wanted to. Like, I was just like,
Has she gotten the feedback, that everyone, because I think a lot of people said that was the performance of the year. Like, that's been on a lot of lips. Between that and Starry Eyes, the lead actress in Starry Eyes, they're two.
And Babadook,
Nancy Davis. Yeah, there's three great, and they're probably the best performances, male or female, last year.
No, for sure.
They're all really strong. But
I think she's getting that feedback.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
the question is, does she want to spend the rest of her life in Cara syrup? But and she also, like, it was really interesting, their styles, because Anne is very method, and then Jill is very logical. So she needs to know how this makes sense. And for my directing with her, is just trusting in some of the physicality, because sometimes none of it's not going to make any sense when she's writhing on the doing possession stuff. It's hard as an actor to try to make that real, so you have to kind of trust in the physicality. It's much more of a representational, sort of like the way the British do it, and the outside's in.
How much of that was her versus a stunt double? Because there's some parts where she gets like very physical at the end.
It's all her.
Wow.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
That's a trooper.
Yeah, it's all her. And frankly, she got naked, and she was just like willing to do anything, fearless. I mean, she had fear, and there were moments where you could feel her go, "Should I do?" But once she did it, she just owned everything. She was like, yeah. So although she did, at one time I was like, "Jill, now touch yourself," and she was like, "No, okay." That's I do have a limit.
Right, he was on a roll. Yeah.
Oh, and Anne Ramsey is nominated for a Chainsaw Award through Fango.
Oh, is she?
You guys didn't know that?
I have no idea. I live under a rock. I don't know.
All right.
All over Fango right now, and she's nominated
Good.
For Best Supporting Actress.
Oh, wow.
That's incredible.
Jill as well.
Yeah.
As lead?
Hold on.
She better be.
I know Anne Ramsey is for Taking of Deborah Logan. Hold on, let me look up the other one.
That's neat.
Yeah, that's the one I remembered, but I don't know if the actress one is.
That's great, though.
But you guys are definitely up for Best Supporting Actress.
Okay.
That's wonderful. And she deserves it. She really was just incredible. And that and was also even helpful as writers, is they would kind of approach it with helpful logic questions. And they would, if something wasn't 100% bulletproof, they'd say, well, wait a minute, if I was running a charity 6 years ago, then how did I do this and do that? And they'd be like, okay, give us 5 minutes. We'll come back with an answer. But that was really helpful, because I think they were approaching it sort of very much from a kind of a logic perspective. And that was really helpful to us.
In a way.
Yeah, and just sort of what's the backstory, what happened, tons of, because
then it becomes theirs. It's they own it then. It's like it's no longer yours, it's theirs, and so
like the scene where there's a scene earlier on where it's one of the early scenes they're being interviewed about Alzheimer's, and she's kind of walking through the history of what happened, and the mom and daughter, it's kind of a two-hander there, and they really, I think it was like a 25-minute take or something like that, and it was just, we were all just like sitting there watching it wrapped, and then
it was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was fun, but they brought just so much to it. It was exciting. It's just fun to watch, and all the crew responded as well. You heard, because there was a lot of crew that were kind of breaking their backs for no money, and a few, especially the second AD, I remember talking to him, he said, like, yeah, I'm exhausted, but I stuck my head in the other day, and I saw one of these scenes, and I saw what they were doing, and it just energized me and made us feel like maybe we are doing something that's going to get seen, and it was neat.
That was very true. Yeah, you could feel the palpable sense of. Other than like, let's fire the director. He's clearly a hack.
That was daily,
but you could sense that there was a communal sort of like, wow. I mean, we would be at the monitor watching Jill do something, and we would just be like, I literally had to like not gasp like a 13-year-old girl, like an audible level, because she just blew. She's the special effect. Her performance is the special effect, and so I'm
The
so
cheapest
proud
special
of them.
effect is getting good actors.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's
Yeah.
so true, and we've been on projects where there are not so good actors, and
Yeah.
it's that's a cancer in a production. You know, if you so you have to. That's so much of directing is just finding the right people. You know, it really is, and they'll do things that you could never imagine. You know, and make a moment live. That and then we try to write these prosaic monologues when we're writing something. It's like, no, you can do half of that with less. You know, so,
Right.
Same with
more
scares too. Scares and effects. We had there are other things that were in there that were sort of complex effects or complex makeup, and a lot of the times we would just sort of scale it back because we just realized that it's just scarier. Like whatever Jill's going to do in this chair with nothing on her face is going to be scarier, and
It's true.
Always was.
Yeah, one anecdotal story is that she was supposed to vomit earthworms on camera, and it's like and we a small movie, you're not going to get a bunch of trial runs, and it misfired. It had this very viscous sort of like mud and versus water or Fuller's earth, which they're used to, and it misfired and exploded like a cannon all over everybody. And in retrospect, it's like and it would have been cool visually, but again, believability.
Right. The emotion sells it more than the effect.
Yeah.
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 Was this your first feature as a director?
It was. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your history doing this? Because I've met you as an actor on certain things
Oh,
and
yeah,
an
that's
editor. Because I remember you from the 2001 Maniacs movie, and then I saw you. Then I met you in the editing bay for the sequel.
Oh yes.
Wow.
So then, it took me a while to put together that you're the director. So I was like, I've met this guy before.
That's funny.
So what was kind of your path? I mean, did you always want to be a director, and you were kind of doing the editing thing?
I just wanted to be famous. To be completely candid and do lots of drugs and have frivolous sex constantly.
It's happened.
We just moved the road.
Oh man, I have friends I won't disclose, but a super successful friend. He's like, it's all about fucking. All about just all the success, all the filmmaking bullshit. It's about who you can fuck.
That's hilarious.
Well, I
91
had,
episodes. I'm glad we got to the bottom of that.
Yeah.
There you
No
go.
director has said that.
I
until
had
now.
I have another very successful friend who one day I was talking with him and I was like, can you believe as much as you've done? And he was like, at some point I thought I would do cocaine off a prostitute's ass, and it still has not happened, and it's not going to.
Something to live for.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
It's like I have not
One
made
day,
it
yeah.
yet until
You
I
can
do
actually do
coke
that
off a
very
prostitute's
cheaply.
ass.
I was gonna say you
I
can
think
figure
Be
it
a
out.
failure and do
Yeah.
that.
You
We've done
shoot
that
it for
twice
like
today.
high grade
Okay,
coke and
okay,
high
fair
grade
enough.
prostitute.
Okay, that's a little more
Yeah.
complicated.
I mean, you could do that in like the back alley of Van
Yeah,
Nuys
right.
right now.
Yeah,
I think
it's
it's
not
aiming a
difficult.
little higher.
Right. To do before every podcast.
Well, then how did you two hook up in terms of
It was a
working together?
bathhouse in Poland.
Oh,
It's a very complex
Very,
story.
Actually, we met through Tim Sullivan. Actually, we were working on a Tim Sullivan project, and it was.
I think I just found the first picture that comes up looks like a Tim Sullivan
Him
movie.
and his
The one in the center.
If there's a sheep in there, then it's the right one.
No,
Right.
he's the one in the center.
Yeah.
That totally looks like a Tim
I didn't
Sullivan.
recognize you with the
shirtless?
shirt on.
That's my
He
best
needs to be
assets.
shirtless, then,
It's
okay.
It's classy.
Did you
stay
work
classy,
directing,
Robitel?
or was it like a?
Often, most of the time.
Fair
but
enough.
no, I mean to get back to your question in all seriousness, like what helped me the most out of film school, because you go to film school and then you're like, there's a myriad of ways you can get in. But for me, editing was such an informative period of my life. And I got to do some documentary stuff early on, and I cut my teeth on some movie marketing stuff. I worked with Brian on Superman Returns, but editing was such a great school and even now, because Gavin's an editor, and when you think like an editor, you think about what's extraneous, how things can cut, and
Yeah.
that's such a great proving ground for directing, because a lot of people don't know how that stuff puts together, and
It's pivotal.
it's pivotal. And anybody with a final cut can go and learn how to do that. So that was like the real formative. And in terms of directing, I'm a competent writer. I just don't like writing. It's been much more fun with working with a partner, but it's painful. It's a very painful process. I'm about to direct a movie that I wrote that I optioned to Guillermo del Toro, and
great.
I'm very excited. But directing is just a means of avoiding writing, to be completely honest. So,
what kind of film is that? Is it a genre film as well?
it's a genre film. It's based on a true story of a family of serial killers that moved into the Kansas Territory in the 1870s. It's sort of a Coen Brothers Western horror love story.
Oh, wow.
Based on a true story.
But found footage.
Obviously.
Yeah, they have GoPros. It's the 1870 version of GoPro.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's interesting. And that's a Go picture? Like this is happening soon?
I mean, we'll see. I'm going to will it into existence.
Okay.
We're in the early infancy stages. And
Before we delve into our favorite found footage films,
Or least favorite,
or the
or
least
whatever
favorite,
it
or the
becomes.
best. But really quick, I mean, we always like hearing, and our listeners like hearing about how you kind of discovered the genre. What were the films that had the most influence on you as a kid? Was it at the video store, etc.? So how did you both what are your early genre memories?
I guess we have kind of different. I think Adam was sort of the diehard horror fan from when he was 3 years old, and mine was kind of more of a boomerang approach. I guess when I was a little kid, I big into Stephen King books, and even when I was kind of 11, 12 years old, I really remember reading those and being formative. I was too scared to go see like Jason and Freddy Krueger and all that stuff. I was just terrified by the boxes of those movies in the video store. So I would still, I'd have visions of Freddy in my hall just from seeing the cover. So I was afraid, but then kind of it came back around, and just sort of, I guess about 6-7 years ago, I started really getting back into it. And a lot of it was because the market was going that way. And then I kind of just rediscovered horror. I think like what had happened was I had mistaken it sort of for slashers and torture porn. And what I discovered as I kind of got back into it was that it's so much more complex than that. And it can be a comedy, or it can be a love story, or it can be all these different things within the umbrella of that genre. So it's been kind of a boomerang approach, I guess. So I was there in the beginning when I was 10, and then I sort of rediscovered it now when I had the courage 20 years later.
I was my grandmother was I was really close to her, and she's a lot of Deborah Logan is sort of based on my grandmother, but she raised me on the most terrifying fucking ghost stories. Like, she was convinced that her house was possessed for a period of 7 years with this talking board. And I have older cousins who
talking board.
A Ouija. It was not a Ouija. It was a Zariah board. If you go online, there's a museum of talking boards. Yeah,
Already
look it up.
there.
Zariah board.
Why are we writing
A
this?
much more complicated Ouija board. And but I have fully grown cousins who were convinced that there was a demonic entity in the house, and certain thing it materialized itself physically, and from black cats during blizzards to logs falling and collapsing in the shape of a collie dog in the fire. Like, it was just really scary. I was, terrified from these stories. And so I was always imbued with a sense of wonder for horror and all things horrific. And, I was one of those kids who went to West Coast Video and watched reruns of, Rawhead Rex and all the early Clive Barker stuff.
Where are you guys from?
I'm from Toronto, actually, originally, and Adam
From Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
But and being from Boston
wow.
actually was very informative. So all these old buildings, and so you grew up with a Gothic sensibility. And
Ghost stories.
up?
Boston and ghost stories always go
Oh yeah,
well
it is. It's
together to
one
me,
big ghost story. It
I'm
really
looking
is.
at Zariah boards now. These things are like crazy complicated. Like, I wouldn't even know how to read this.
Let's see it. Can you?
Super
Passing
scary.
it around.
They literally, my grandmother had to have a woman come from the church and bless the house in tongues, and she,
Wow.
and literally the board wouldn't burn. But it had she talked about it like an addiction, and they would go up to her house in New Hampshire in the middle of the woods every weekend, and they would have this compulsion to play this game, and it knew things that like my grandfather was a total cynic, fought in World War II. He said, if that thing's so real, you tell me what my partner in World War II's name was. What was my infantry partner's name? And it spelled out PHISH, fish, and his face turned fucking blanket white, and he left the house and never came back. So it had supernatural knowledge.
So what did you know the rest of the story? Or was it because somebody was really...
Towards the end of the use of it, because they played it for a period of 7 years, it started to have biblical things. It said it had 7 things that repeatedly told them to do. One of them was smash skulls, kill babies. It was like very, very severe, horrific things.
Which does seem like a demon thing.
Yeah,
like,
I want to know how you read these things, because there's just so much abbreviations and stuff on
It almost
them.
looks like an astrological
Yeah.
wheel
yeah,
of some
it
type.
does look,
Those are pretty intense.
so much more evil because of that.
And you say
really.
playing it like
Yeah.
it's a game of some type.
Yeah.
What's that movie? Another Dimitri movie, Lovely Molly.
Lovely Molly,
The
yeah.
elements of that really worked for me was the actual thing itself. Like when you would see this kind of blackness and this.
I haven't seen it.
There's
I've read the
some-
script.
Most people
Scared me.
did like it.
I
It
didn't
unnerved
like
me.
it.
I
You
liked
didn't
it. I found it really creepy.
Take that, Eduardo Sanchez. You jumped a shark.
But they were really nice. I mean, the lead girl and her husband and Eduardo signed at the Fangoria booth at Comic-Con the year that it came out, and they were wonderful people. I just did
I
not
bet you
enjoy
said
the
you
film.
liked it to their face, you scumbag.
He jumped the molly.
I haven't seen it.
No, you
I hadn't
haven't.
seen it.
He jumped the molly.
Yeah, but I think it kind of evoked. You should watch it because the thing you're describing, that compulsion, I felt like that's one thing that movie, when it was doing things right, it was kind of hitting that thing about being alone with something that you don't really understand, but has a greater history than you.
I wish I still believed in demons. I mean, to be completely candid, I'm sort of like a closet agnostic at this point in my life, and I it seems like a silly, ridiculous Bronze Age fiction at this point. I don't want to decry anybody's faith,
They're
but
coming for you now.
Exactly.
I mean, the devil was a New Testament, didn't exist in the Old Testament. It's like a sort of a new invention, and like this whole. I mean, I don't want to get into. I'm sorry, believers in the audience, but
no, but the age is a lot of it too. That's what we talk about. Like sometimes, watching the difference between watching that horror movie at age 10 and watching it at age 30. Some depends on the person, but I know for me is a giant difference. Because everything's possible when you're 10. And so some people in their 40s, they just can't even watch and have to have their hands in front of their eyes. And can't, so that's a gift, I think, to be able to retain that sense of wonder and belief. But
I think that's why it's surprising, like say with taking a Deborah Logan, the fact that people who've watched so many horror movies were still actually going, oh wow, that was actually effective. That's getting rarer and rarer.
The window's smaller, I think. So thank you for saying that. It's very kind of you.
Too many films.
Very kind of you.
We're trying to aim for the cynical person too. I think that's the thing we sort of look at. We sort of say, okay, let's rather than sort of aiming for the audience that wants to like this, let's try to aim for the audience that is cynical, hates it, doesn't want any part of it. Let's try to get them. Let's try to get our hands on them.
With Devil, I remember when I saw Devil Inside, I almost said after that movie, like, never again. And I think I'll stick to the no priests. No exorcism movie on found footage anymore. I think I will stick to that. Paranormal at least is playful. The last Paranormal Activity was such left field from the rest. I was like, that's kind of fun. I'll give it a pass. But so many of them are just like gone down that road. And it ends with a website. You're like, I'm going to fuck some shit up right now. I'm going to cut you. Luckily, it was free when I saw it. Had I paid for that, I'm sure I would have just lost my mind. But it's like we've seen it before. Even if the effects are great, which they were in that film, they had some great actors doing the possession moments. That's great. But your actual film still sucked. At the core of it, there was something lacking.
Well, it's not a complete film if they don't give you an ending.
You're right. That's true.
That's not fair.
Yeah. So found footage. Beyond just the films, what are some of the things that you like work for you in the found footage? Like for me, I was saying immediacy is a big one.
Yeah.
The way the frame. I don't want to call it cheating filmmaking, but like where Roman Polanski can construct a full scene and get that scare. Found footage is you're always restricted to a certain perspective, and you can really play with the frame and what jumps out at you. And
I have three that I consider nearly perfect in terms of execution, meaning that, all right, this is literally footage that was found and we were watching it from start to finish. Not including the Blair Witch Project because, like we said, that's kind of an entity unto its own. That's a given, and that was from the time period. Cloverfield. I love that movie. I remember seeing it in Manhattan, and then it was kind of a surreal feeling. Watching Manhattan get destroyed and then walking out into the street and like, what the hell? But you know what? I liked it because that was a time period for quote-unquote found footage movies where they were trying really hard not to break the rules and to be clever. And that was one that did not. That is literally the tapes from start to end. And anytime you needed backstory, it was like where the tape, where they raced over something and it goes back to like something you saw earlier. And I just thought that was really ingenious, including there's something like in the final shot, which is actually from old tape where you see the thing fall in the background, which I'm like, it took me like
the
5
Ferris
years
wheel,
to find
right?
the Ferris wheel. You actually see it in the background or whatever. So in terms of execution, and I found it pretty terrifying. Like that experience.
And the comedy too. The lead, the guy shooting, just sort of his voice of just the taking the piss out of things was just...
Well, one of the questions I was going to bring up, which you're answering right now, is like, are there movies out there that might have been better as found footage? And I'd say maybe Godzilla, which is Cloverfield.
Oh, Cloverfield is,
works as a better way of that story.
And he's
nowadays.
already done monsters, so it's like, I don't,
it's interesting.
And it was also that slow unraveling of the information too. Like you just catch the one military guy with the one line of dialogue that you need, or you just catch a small, the tail of the monster, and now the shoulder, and now the
you don't need full scenes, like in traditional film.
You know what it reminds me? Like not since I was a little kid, and when Cloverfield came out, I said this the way, because I remember even people were like, every horror site was like trying to get a picture of the monster to ruin it for everybody, and nobody had it. They like kept it really tight it and under lock and key, and then you see it at the end of the movie. But what I liked about it was it reminded me of Alien, the original Alien, Ridley Scott one, because you see little bits of it and you're like, what is that? Like you're trying to figure out because you only see it run by or you see like the head.
Yeah.
And you're like, I
Those
don't
things
understand.
falling off of it.
Oh,
too.
that was
you didn't
genius.
know
Yeah.
the biology of it was hard to
So
understand.
every time you see it, you're like, what? I can't even understand what it is.
Yeah.
And that's why when you get that full shot of it, you're like, you're still staring at like the camera guy, like, I don't understand what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And that made it scary to me. And I thought that was a big success, like that they were able to pull that off.
Something
which
like,
is really
yeah,
impressive.
I think like another reason why it worked as well, and this has come up with some other, scripts and ideas we've worked on, but like in a regular movie like that, without found footage, you probably would have to cut to the president of the United States, or you'd have to, have the mayor and the this and these kind of halls of power, which sometimes can work, in a kind of Independence Day version, but because you're in this kind of perspective of sort of the people running for their lives, you're just getting fractures of information, just a little thing on the TV there, just what you need, little nuggets of information as you run through. So I think that's something that's also makes it more real and more scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was a great one.
So we agree with you on that, by the way.
I gotta
love
rewatch that. I
Cloverfield.
liked it in theater, but I would like to see it again. I haven't
Yeah,
seen
it's
it
pretty
since then,
solid.
yeah.
And I think it still holds up.
We refer to it a lot. So.
Yeah. Other one is the first Wreck.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
the sequel too, but the first one,
For sure.
I just remember that I got an import of it because
Dynamite.
it came out already overseas, and I kept hearing about it, and I didn't know anything about it, and it scared the shit out of me.
So
I
simple,
thought-
too.
Simple to the point. I thought it was a great zombie movie, and I was tired of zombie movies at that point. I thought it was a great found footage movie, and it was great, and it stuck to the rules. You were just watching it,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, you get a nice lean, like 78-minute movie, and I am
I heard you earlier saying, was it you? 2-hour movies?
hours,
Just not
pushing it.
I can't get into Boyhood because of that. And Elric
Really?
keeps telling me
But
it's like,
Boyhood's an experience.
okay, Boyhood, it's a daunting experience because
No, it's
I'm like,
not.
okay,
I
this is
love
3
it.
hours
I
of
love
my
it so
life.
much.
I've heard it's amazing.
Some people really hate it.
I need to
just
watch it.
don't get it. Like it's
Neither
so
do I.
good.
It's a beautiful
No,
movie.
I need to sit down and watch
but
it.
it's a horror
really,
podcast.
How long
I
is it?
know, but finding 3 hours?
Oh, 3?
No.
It's
no,
2
but
hours, 40
Elric
minutes.
said it on an
like
episode.
Yeah, I've got it at home.
A few episodes ago, he said, the first 90 minutes are free. Every minute after that.
Especially now.
I heard it, and I heard that at an indie panel once, and it really stuck with me because you started
does.
watching movies going, as soon as you hit 90, you really
As
have
soon
to,
as you hit
better
that
give me
sweet
a
spot.
great reason.
Especially now,
You
and
know?
especially with found footage. Like I think I think there isn't a kind of an extra exhaustion factor that comes into
Definitely.
the sort of found footage. So I think you'll see a lot of them like 86.
Well, that's my
minutes,
number one. My
85.
number one comment about it in terms of issues is the justification. That word is like and I mean like having to continually throughout a film justify it. Like, oh, and now I'm doing this, and it's like I'm done. Like I can't. If that's part of it, if it's finished. We were talking before you guys came on about what we do in the Shadows, the comedy about vampires in New Zealand, and it just starts with the documentary logo, and you're now watching a documentary, and it completely works because it never has to. From then on, not once do they have to even mention why they're making this. It's already made. This is the film. We don't have to tell you we're making a film. This is the film, and that just works so much better, I guess, ultimately than we found this tape. Let's.
You just never want to hear the words, "Don't stop shooting."
Yeah,
Or
right.
"Keep
Or
shooting,
get that
don't
camera
kill
off of me,
yourself."
Teddy.
Yeah,
It's like, no,
that's definitely
no more.
done to death for sure.
But I agree with you. I think Wreck is definitely one of the best horror films.
The last 5 minutes of that too.
amazing.
That's
We
weird,
watched that a lot.
tranny, like 7-foot
yeah.
tall, fucking
Yeah,
whatever.
that's when it gets
Terrifying.
Thing.
Yeah.
Part 4 tries
Terrifying.
to start explaining some of that stuff.
Oh,
in
really?
literal
Okay.
terms, and it has a total ripoff of The Hidden. Like
no,
the biggest
we
ripoff you've
know.
ever seen. Bugs coming out of mouths, and you're watching, going, really? And it's not found footage, so it doesn't even have an aesthetic.
Yeah, no.
CG
Something like
bugs,
that.
CG bugs, just
Yeah, exactly. But no, Rec 2 is good, but it's Rec 1's like perfect.
And I like Rec 2,
It
but-
feels like kind of an extension.
But
of the
Rec
same
2
thing.
just seems like a big FU to quarantine. They're like,
Right.
oh, you read our movie. Well, we're just going to get really religious and crazy now.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what? And I dig that it's crazy like that, but it's a totally different movie.
Right.
I like the kids in Rec 2. Like, I remember
Yeah.
there being like some really
Yeah.
terrifying, like killer kid moments. For some reason, I like Rec 2 better than Rec 1.
It's a cool movie, but I think just if we're talking about
Yeah, Rec 1's like
one
perfect
stands on
kind of-
its own. And the only other one that I really think is kind of perfect and it borders on genre, but like Chronicle is really
Chronicles,
fucking
yeah.
good. And
Uncle is a dream.
even that came out at a period where they're like, well, how do we explain this or whatever? And I accept it. It's like, oh, one of them has powers and just makes the thing like.
But it was also rooted in his deep emotionality to expose his abusive father too. So at the beginning, it's really a great character device because he wants to expose his father's beating the shit out of him. I'm gonna fucking film you. You know,
I just wish that was Fantastic Four. Like if they had, at that
And it
time,
will be.
I know it will be, but I think Fantastic Four, that would have been such an interesting. Like we're doing these experiments and now we've changed and we're documenting how we changed. It'd be so cool to see like a superhero big movie use something lo-fi.
Be
But
careful what you
agrees
wish
with you.
for. I'm sure we'll see a Marvel found footage movie. I'm sure eventually some version or another. Once it's good, the formula has gotten a little tired. I think then you'll see.
Well, there's also,
like
and then
that.
within there's a subgenre of I found footage movies, like within my movie, which is Cannibal Holocaust, which is just incredible the way lines are blurred in that film. Having seen it again, but then also Sinister. You know, it's about the footage he has found.
That's true.
And the footage is fascinating, and the footage is the best stuff about that movie to me.
Yeah.
Are these weird death
So
scenes,
disturbing.
trying to
Crazy
figure them
scenes.
out.
Yeah.
And so it's compelling. There's two different ways to use that. It's not the aesthetic of found footage, but it's,
I've
we
been
talk
seeing
about that
this
a
a
lot.
lot lately because like Honeymoon did it.
is there found footage of that?
Well, they keep cutting to their wedding footage.
Oh yeah, a little bit. Yeah, at the start.
And and they keep like doing these like little testimonials into the camera.
Right.
I actually watched this film called The Remaining, which was by the guy who made Donnie Darko, and it's kind of overly Christian preachy, which is cool. I mean, it's got some cool monsters effects in it, but it does the same thing where it's like a narrative film structure, but every 5 minutes somebody talks into a cell phone, and they talked about one of the actors came and talked about in talkback that they think that that's how events like this would actually go down because it's about the apocalypse. But like, you know, that people would be making cell phone videos of, holy shit, do you see this thing behind me? And they probably would, to be honest.
Did you guys see Lake Mungo? That's one we talked about recently.
Is that the one with the girl
Australian
drowns?
one?
And
Yeah.
oh, it's so cool.
Because that's another interesting, because it's taking a documentary format.
Have you seen that?
No, you told me to see it.
We
so
only saw it
I haven't
recently,
seen
a
it
couple
yet.
of us, and
really
we
gotta
found
pay
it
attention.
effective.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
that's-
Yeah, it's
I
a
have to
little-
get.
That's one that you kind of have to pay attention to get
sure.
the levels on because I didn't the first time, and then BJ had me go back. One of our listeners was like, "Go back and watch it again," and I did, and then I was like, "Okay, I see it now."
And there's fun versions like Man Bites Dog, which is
Yeah, that's
but
on
they're
my
not,
list.
you know, horror. I mean, it depends what you're going for.
Really? You don't think Man Bites Dog is horror?
It's black comedy,
He's
completely.
a serial killer.
But it's not. It's a black comedy through and
He's
through.
a serial killer.
Are you scared of him?
Well, towards the end,
It's a black comedy. It's a comedy that happens to be dark. I mean, that doesn't mean you couldn't put it in the horror section, but it's not, to me, a horror
Have you
film.
seen The Bay? The Bay was interesting too.
See, that's
likes
one
that.
of my
I like that.
fave films.
Oh,
that's
it's fun.
like
It's fun.
it's like right at the top of my like awesome found footage list.
And that's a great example of something that doesn't really, it's just like a bunch of different sources that, you know, some was news, some surveillance, some, it's like he never really tries to explain how it was all cut together and you just buy it.
But I've gotten a lot of flack for liking that film.
Right.
Like, not even just from these guys, like people on Twitter being like, I heard you talking about The Bay. How can you like that film? And I will say that the lead
Barry
girl...
Levinson has haters.
Yeah.
just
The
like-
lead girl, the one who kicks it all off because she's supposed to be like a news intern or something like that. Little wonky. I mean, I guess it's just her. She kind of enters the story a little awkward because she's like, we need to revisit the events of this day, and I've collected all this footage, and here it is. So her kind of opening's wonky, but I think that I love The Bay because it is a found footage film, but it is such body horror.
Yeah, it's
that
great.
I think it's phenomenal.
I gotta check that one out. too.
I've never seen Poughkeepsie tapes. I keep hearing
I
it.
own it.
I have it. I haven't watched it.
Okay, maybe
either.
I'll come around and watch. I'm just curious.
I mean,
Why
it's
is
scary.
it? What's the notoriety about with that film?
Well, it played in New
trailer
York
was really
while I
scary.
was there. It played in
Good
New
marketing.
York. I don't even. It was part of a festival in New York.
I heard the rumor I heard, and this probably has nothing to do with the release, but I've heard of this screening, and it's notorious. Is that they tried to play it like it was a real thing, and the audience turned on them drastically.
I don't
Like
remember
how?
that
How did they turn on them?
element,
Like,
but,
burn the
Like I
building
just
down?
they just were not buying. They're like this is real footage, and they were all like started booing.
It's a sign of the times. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it really is like it's just it's evolved. You know, the art form and definitely the found footage art form has evolved, just as the consciousness of the audiences have.
Yeah.
Like, so it's
Well, just
an
like for
extra
a long time,
challenge.
reality TV was, it's reality TV.
Yeah.
And
But-
then now everyone's like, but
Yeah.
it's scripted in this moment's bullshit.
But
Oh,
the
yeah.
Poughkeepsie tapes has kind of become legendary as the unreleased film because it never got released. So people tend to champion it as kind
Yeah.
of this, unseen gem.
Yeah.
it's just
Why won't
very
they let
much
us
like
see it?
There's some creepy scenes.
There's
like
some
when he
creepy
like
scenes, yeah.
crawls in like on his hands and knees, and like
It's
she's
just
chained
very
up.
much
It's very
like
torture porn.
yeah, it's torture porn because like, this is like
I don't need
2006,
to see that.
2007. It's just very much like I chained a girl to the wall and I'm going to torture her for an hour and a half and take
Maybe
it
that's why
for
everyone
you.
booed.
So yeah, I mean it's kind of standard torture porny. There's
Yeah.
nothing in it that is like amazing and stands out past the fact that it's
Some
like this
creepy
unseen
voyeuristic,
thing.
like, you know, stalking stuff where he's stalking his victims and stuff. But
Even that I'd seen in other
Yeah,
horror films at
sure.
that time, because I mean, by the time that Poughkeepsie Tapes came out, like last horror movie had come out, the last broadcast,
Yeah.
we'd seen America's Deadliest Home Video, things like this. So it's kind of like we kind of knew the tropes by the time we got to
I feel
that
like
point.
it works pretty well in a short format, like the VHS format. Not usually VHS doesn't work because the wraparound doesn't work, but there'll be individual stories within all three of them that are fantastic. I think each one of the three has a standout story that's like, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because you're placing them with other films that were made randomly in a way, right, by different directors with no real cohesion of a greater thing. But there's moments of them where that found footage really suits what they're doing. I really like how Bruckner puts it in David Bruckner puts it in the glasses, and they're going to go out on the town, and I'm just going to see, and then it just goes fucking AWOL, batshit with this creature flying up in the air, and you're like, oh my God. Yeah. So, I mean, I think when you can be surprising with found footage, it can really work, but it's hard to maintain that for an hour and a half.
Well, yeah, that's it. Short is
much easier.
And I think like a lot of the ones where the logic gets really strained is usually in the second half, once you start getting into these intimate character moments and things where you just probably wouldn't be framing yourself in a 2-shot, you know, with that handheld camera, like, and usually the beginning you have a semi-legitimate setup, even for the most shaky of them all. But it's once all hell breaks, that's the challenge. Really, is when you're being chased by a guy with an axe or whatever the hell it is, you know. Why are you still filming?
Right.
Do you guys like Catfish?
Yeah, I think it's interesting especially when it first came out.
It made me really sad.
Yeah, that's really great indictment of our
like
times in a way. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really, but you're expecting some great horror third act, but it's very unnerving, and it's more of, like you said, it's a character study, and it's sad at the end, but very weird.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
The weird thing about the
now.
show, it's a show, and you would think it's fake, but I actually got to go on where they produce it, and it's really quite real. Like, that's one of the few reality shows where the people they're really looking up these stories. I mean, I'm sure they stage certain moments just to make a show, but I was really shocked because I went behind the scenes, it's going to be bullshit. And man, they're painstakingly make sure that these people are real people, and that there's a story there. So I was surprised by that.
Wow.
But no, that's an interesting film. And had that had a last act horror, probably would be one of the great horror films. Like, had a terrifying ending, but
It does seem like a perfect setup for it, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, you have and then something goes wrong and they embarrass the person and then all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
But, well.
I like those ones like Trash Humpers, The Begotten. Although I don't like them as fun movies to watch, but I like how they fit the medium. Like The Begotten, just as this thing. They're like weird documents. You wouldn't want to watch it for fun, but like the one time you watch it, you go, "Oh, it's an interesting." The guy made Possession, the movie I always talk about here, but the best found footage I've ever seen, easily. It's not even close. Is about there may be like 60-minute portion of this crazy 2.5-hour movie he made that's still unfinished and lost on the Silver Globe, and it's a science fiction film, and it has this sequence in it where everyone in theater was just like you
Is
couldn't
that
even
the people
believe
on
how
the poles one?
that's part of it, but it's like
Okay.
literally they find this box that some species had carried around in the future and filmed it, and you get to watch how it's filmed, and your mind is blown. And so while the movie
Where can one see this?
I think there's a shitty Polish release right now, but it's going to be a good release soon. So the same people who put out Possession, they're working on it right now. So I'd wait for it, but it's like, so in the middle of this movie, the rest is normal narrative filmmaking. I started with Andrew Cash, and both of us at the end looked at each other and go, there's moments of that is the best film ever made.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
literally the most like dynamic filmmaking you've ever seen. But because communism came in, they literally took his film and kicked him out of the country. And as far as he knew, the whole thing was burned. But it turned out all the actors stole reels.
Wow.
And they hid the reels and eventually got 90%.
Wow.
Maybe 80%
When was
back.
this?
They screened it
in the 70s.
Yeah, they screened it at Cinefamily 2 years ago.
Yeah, what they have.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the parts that are missing, he put himself in to kind of give these little things. And it broke you out of the movie.
Just address his camera like
A little
what you
bit.
would be
It's
seeing
weird
here
little things
is
he filmed, and it's a shame because I actually felt the other way. I thought make this 88 minutes because right now it's like 2.5, and it's gonna be
wow.
but it was the use of found footage because I'm watching it and I wasn't even thinking about found footage, and then as it was wrapping up, throughout this segment of it, I was like, oh, I've just been watching like the greatest found footage film ever made. So
That's interesting.
Keep your eye out for that if it ever comes out. But I think sometimes it can work better for those kind of things. I say trash numbers not because it's a great movie, but you can figure out a way to use something like that to create something that feels like a lost document, or smell films, or
That's the
obviously
trick.
jumping on the same thing.
You match the concept to I think when you try to jam in a concept that shouldn't be found footage into found footage is usually when it doesn't work. That's pretty obvious to say, but you see a lot of that where they just try to jam it in. And I think regular people go out to the woods to get drunk and sit around a campfire. They don't usually set up 3 cameras with perfect 3-point coverage and reverse shot. And so I think just people would react to that. And the initial, I think the impulse of found footage was to try and make things as real as humanly possible. Right. So it's immersive and exciting. But a lot of times I think, unfortunately, it has the opposite effect now, because you have those scenes you're talking about where they're just like, I need you to keep filming this because of X, Y, and Z and this and
What's
that.
What's weird is eventually this whole conversation will be irrelevant, because we were just reading this article on the automated cars and how that's going to be a sea change in terms of like, eventually they'll just replace like taxi cabs in New York City, and it'll be a sea change because when I use my car for 4% of the time, and so it's just sitting there, and so it's like a really kind of a. And the same goes for filming, because you think about it, like Facebook has become like your own sort of timeline, and eventually either we're going to be wearing some sort of technology, or there'll be a constant stream. Your whole life will be a digital avatar.
We're getting there.
I mean, it really, right? I mean, it sounds like Philip K. Dick, but I mean, eventually that's where it's going to go, right?
Yeah.
Is it Black Book? No, what's the show?
Mirror.
Black Mirror.
Black
Yeah,
Mirror.
just figured out the time. But we've been watching that series, and that's
Elric
literally
Kane.
stuff
You
like
look at people that have passed away on
beer.
Facebook, it becomes like this weird time capsule.
Have
Yeah,
you
it
seen the
does.
show yet?
Oh, I'm sorry?
Black Mirror. Have you seen the
No.
show?
Oh,
It's
you'll
great.
like it.
It's on
Yeah.
Netflix, and there's only 6 episodes, and it will
British.
blow you away.
Biting social commentary. Some of them are pretty bleak, but they're just, you'll leave them just blown away.
It's kind of show where
Black
each
Mirror.
episode looks like it had a $2 or $3 million budget per episode.
Wow.
Like it's
Wow.
a real deal.
And they're all,
production.
they're all separate stories, but they all involve technology. It's like a few years. What you just said is the premise of our
premise
film.
of the show.
Interesting.
Did
Did you guys ever see one called Evidence?
You know what? I wanted to ask you about that because it never came out here.
Yeah, I bought the
right?
import when I was at a
But
show.
I remember seeing the trailer, and I thought the trailer was scary as shit.
Evidence?
Well, I'll tell
Yeah.
you what it is, and
It's a
very
really
simple.
good trailer.
It's the first 45 minutes is, hey, we could get the camera and let's go camping. Can you believe Bob's never been camping? We've got to document this. And I'm not fucking kidding. So it's probably one of the worst setups. And then the last 20 minutes or maybe 15 is like big scale fucking craziness. Like big scale. Like you go from these guys camping, oh, I think I see something. And suddenly, I won't ruin it, but I was literally like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
Like big
That's what the
stuff
trailer-
starts happening. And
Wow.
that's really great.
That's
Like,
what the trailer is, where they just go into the woods, and then you're like, is that a fucking mond? I don't even know what that is.
The problem being, why not
it
make
never
the
came
first half a
out.
little better?
Yeah.
If you had just made it a little more
There's
textured,
that.
it would probably be a great film rather
Right.
than it's bad and then it gets really interesting.
Usually it's the other way
Yeah.
around.
Exactly,
Usually,
yeah.
it's harder to
But I
finish
would
than
say for
start it.
people who talking about this, that one is worth tracking down for that reason, because it's interesting to see them go somewhere. Like, yeah, and it's just a shame.
Which
they
one
didn't
was that
make it.
one
It's
called?
just called
Evidence.
Evidence. And I think it's maybe still an import, but I don't know. I mean, I'll just lend it to anyone.
Yeah,
I've
I'll
got
borrow
it
it.
here,
Yeah,
the
I have
import.
a couple that I think are kind of cool setups, but I mean, they all are flawed. Well, I mean, actually, some of the ones on my list that we haven't mentioned yet, like District 9, technically found
Oh,
footage.
yeah, yeah.
Monsters, Troll Hunter.
Yeah,
I mean, these are like some top-notch
they're
ones.
fun movies.
Cropsy, too. I don't know. Would you
But that
consider
is a
that one?
real
documentary,
It's like
right?
it's a real documentary,
was
but
real.
it's
Doc.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, we'll call it a doc.
Yeah.
I consider it fictionalized, but
I'm
we'll
working
call
on a
it
Cropsy
doc.
project.
No, but it's
right
real,
now.
Okay.
right? It's a real documentary, right?
It's a documentary. Yeah, it's a real documentary.
Yeah,
They appropriated the Cropsy mythology for this, the Staten Island murders.
Okay.
Okay.
That's right, yeah.
But it's not. None of it is. It's all just about the murders in the town, and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One that it was actually a runner-up on my top 10 list this year, which one of our listeners did not like, because he messaged me on Twitter and was like, you made me watch that damn Possession of Michael King. But even he was like, it was a really cool setup. And that's why I actually recommend people to it. I will say, like, the ending, I was groaning by the end. But it's a guy who decides to research demonology by going through every type of kind of occultism that he can find. Like he tries necromancy, and then he tries sex magic, and then he tries Ouija boards. That's another movie coming out. Yeah. But no, he goes through all of these things, and it's because his wife is dead, and he's kind of doing this as like a fuck you God. So he tries all these different things, and he documents them as he goes. And it actually gets really cool, and it's got some good scares in it at parts. The end gets a little wonky, but yeah, it's got some decent stuff in it too.
I remember the trailer, where he's kind of addressing the camera and here's my plan, and I remember that.
See, that's where it gets wonky because he talks into the camera about himself a lot, and he comes across as really pretentious. And very much like, I'm better than everybody, and I'm doing this, and I don't buy any of this. And I mean, like, I don't buy any of that either, but he's really annoying about it in the movie. But then things start happening, and you don't know which one of the things led to it. And
are there any films you guys can think of that might have worked almost more interestingly had they been found footage? I'm really saying that because I really think maybe around part 3 or 4, I think a found footage Soul movie could have been really interesting. If he had made a document and then that's what you're watching, it might have re-energized that at a certain point where things started to get
I don't know.
dull.
I don't think in this, because, obviously the big, rumor is how much, Platinum Dunes wants to do Friday the 13th and that, and we're all just like, no, why?
That's one I don't see.
But Saw, I mean, that just makes me laugh.
It's just more out of curiosity.
It's so ludicrous.
But no, I mean, because I had this aversion to Rec 4 and thought maybe that would have been more fun. It just made me question, like, I wonder if there's some other movies that could have worked. Like, you could certainly say modern Poltergeist. If somebody had approached it, you could have done it that way. Then it might not feel like Poltergeist,
right?
Or The Entity or something like that. But
yeah, I don't know.
It's just a challenge, because like it's always a trade-off. You may get more realism, but like I think one of the sacrifices is you often lose POV. As much as you get it a little bit. Okay, who's filming and what's their intention, but you can't have somebody's imagination. You can't have a flashback. I mean, you can. There are little gimmicks you can do to have the illusion of a flashback, like Cloverfield and so on. But I think, and one of the most exciting things about film is POV, is being in the perspective of whether it's a bad guy, a good guy, or something like that.
Or a reaction shot, rather than a reaction from across the room.
So the thing I learned is, as a neophyte director, is it's so hard to do a jump scare with one camera and one perspective. It's just impossible. And Insidious is a great example. It lulls you into a moment. You're talking about the demon in the house, and then it cuts back, and then the lipstick demon's behind you, and you have a big musical sting, and that's so effective. And
the only way you could do that is if there's multi-cameras.
Yeah, but
came in with like 5 cameras.
I think this is
one
of the reasons I like The Bay. It has 2 amazing jump scares in it. Surprisingly, I mean, I don't. It's just, and they're not set up. I mean, there's no music.
You're just getting us more Barry Levinson hate mail.
Way to bring it back to The Bay.
Well, the greatest scare in The Descent is all on a camcorder.
That's true. That's very true.
Was that the first appearance where it's like,
Signs, the birthday.
And both Rec 1 and Rec 2, I mean, are powerful because of their jump scares.
Oh yeah.
So it's possible.
Yeah, the old woman just running at them is
definitely possible. That's the scariest way. The first one where she just runs like hurtling at the camera and they shoot her like 6 times. Like that was
28
disturbing.
weeks later could have worked in that. Could probably too.
Probably.
I mean, 28 days later it really works as its own thing. But if you had done a sequel, you could have.
Yeah.
Often, it's arbitrary. It's just I was wondering if there's anything that struck you.
That's an interesting question. I
maybe disaster movies, maybe. I don't know. I mean, Independence Day, maybe, or something.
A couple weeks from now, if you wake up in a cold sweat going, oh my God.
It will happen.
We're remaking.
Vertigo would have worked so well.
Yes. Exactly.
We're remaking Frankenhooker as a found
I like
footage
it.
film.
Citizen Kane. And we should do The Godfather, maybe, found footage.
Yeah, somebody's wearing a wire, a mic.
There you go. He's an FBI informant, so that's why he's in there. That's perfect.
Yeah, I like
the conversation as a found footage.
Yeah, actually, that one does kind of make sense. Yeah,
that would work.
Has anyone seen Zombie Diaries? And I never saw it. I don't know.
The 4th? Was that the 4th?
They made 2 of them. I don't know.
By Romero?
No. That's Diary of the Dead.
Yeah.
No, this is a completely different one that Dimension put out. Yeah, Diary of the Dead, interesting idea, and it's interesting for somebody like Romero to try something different, but it didn't really work in that case, unfortunately.
Really. Is that where they're in the kind of gated community, or am I confusing that?
No, that's a later one. That's like the 5th
Survival?
one. Yeah, that's Survival.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they get a little confused.
By then, it's too late.
Right.
Turn back.
The only other one I have on my list that I want to see is the one that Becca's talked about so much, The Borderlands, which is being called Final Prayer.
That's it. It's not Vatican. It's,
And it's
Final
not out
Prayer.
yet, but it's going to be released here as Final Prayer.
It's a slow burn, but when it's great, it's great.
So the big question, though, is like, is this the end of a course? Are we at the end of that kind of filmmaking, or are we going to have a lull where audiences have just kind of experienced it? It feels to me like we are. I feel like there's a cycle. Every cycle has had a period. Mm-hmm. It felt to me like what you were saying about I feel like you guys might be the death rattle in terms of making a good film in that format, because it just feels like.
I'll say just, emotionally, and as we start to pitch other things, we're definitely reticent to try to go down that route, or at least do hybrids. And even, we're working on stuff now, and hybrids are tricky too. I don't know that I've ever seen a hybrid that's really
I don't think
worked
they
100%.
Yeah, because you set the language, and then I think for me, I think Sinister did work structurally in that way, where you had the cinematic setup, and then you punch into to found footage.
But it was very regimented with how the hybrids worked within the film.
But they're also oblique and abstract, and blurry.
The alien abduction one was way, it did not work for me. I was
I was just talking about that earlier in the show, that I need to see it because I'm on an alien kick right now. And I actually did watch an alien found footage film.
I like some of it, yeah.
See, I need to see it again because I remember seeing parts of it. I can't remember the whole plot. But there was one I saw a couple of years ago called Wicksboro Incident, which is a flawed film, but I thought the setup was amazing. It was that this Texas town of 50 people just vanishes off the face of the earth. Long ago, half a decade ago, and now they're going back to the town and trying to figure out what happened to it.
That's neat.
And it was
sounds like a J.J. Abrams movie.
Yeah, it was
TV show.
It was grand scale idea, and the execution on screen was kind of a slog, but it was such a grand scale idea. I was like, "Oh, this is awesome!" And then it didn't really go anywhere.
Do you remember Thesis, the Emnabar film Thesis?
Thesis,
is that found footage or just partially?
Partial, just because of the gimmick of the snuff films. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I'd like to see that again.
Thesis
but
is great.
How long have we been saying that reality TV is a fad and it's going to go away? And I don't.
Reality TV is not going anywhere because it's cheap.
And the same I would say goes for found footage horror, because there's new producers every day that want to get into the business, and it's like $1 million. Let's go make.
I guess the better question is, will audiences still eat it up? I mean, I can see people making.
Will they go theatrical?
But I feel like the audiences are starting to skew. But I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know, because if it's all just streaming on Netflix, are people do you start a found footage film and go fuck no, found footage, and then move on to the next one on Netflix?
I don't. Unless it was
some people do. There's definitely a real backlash.
I think it is. I think
legit,
we are seeing a legit shift.
But I will say, at AFM last year, there was a lot of found footage.
I bet. Yeah.
And if there's a void, does it go somewhere else? Does it become another thing? Or what fills the void
into something?
That's the question. Because again, it's hard to make $1 million movie look good. Yeah. That's one of the aesthetics of just cheap movies. It's
Insidious did it.
Yep.
It's $1 million in terms of shooting.
No, they did a great job too. Yeah.
I mean, that was a surprise, I think, for a lot of people when they found that. I mean,
I think they also had a lot of favors. Of course, and they had other resources available that average
pulled that off.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Plus a great filmmaker. I mean, they did a lot of things right with that one for sure. But it's a challenge. I think a new concept will break the mold anytime. So if there is a concept that makes found footage work again, I think that'll work, and you'll see more. I think it's all just about money. It's like if there's a successful found footage movie, you'll see 5 more come out that year.
And there's always knee jerk reactions too. I mean, the town is filled with it's like, oh, that didn't work. Let's pull off all these projects that are similar. Right. So it's just it's weird like that, but I don't think it's going to go away. I really don't.
Yeah.
Okay. One nay, one yay.
I think it's going away.
I think it's going to be here for a while.
I do too. It's like hemorrhoids. It's like herpes. It's like
if I think about what the overwhelming trend I'm seeing in filmmaking right now, and what financiers are looking for, what the distribution companies are looking to buy, and the answer across the board is cheap.
Right.
Yeah.
And found footage is that.
Yeah, and I'm finding this financing other movies there's the $1 to $3 million range, and then it jumps to like maybe 10, and then from there it's just the mid-sized
You're
movies.
at Sony.
You're at Sony.
You're doing a
and then-
Marvel movie, pretty much.
So,
Like, at this point.
it sucks. It sucks.
Yeah,
It's
but I
hard.
think also one of the advantages of found footage you can argue is that you can potentially get away without stars, which keeps your prices way down
But
as
horror,
well.
you can do that anyway.
Yeah, that's
Horror's
true.
always been the genre.
That's
where,
true. Yep.
Stars don't lead it. I mean, in the big budget like Conjuring, yes, you need to fill it with some stars. But in general, that's the one nice thing about horror.
That's
think,
true.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's interesting.
Okay,
Well, we'll see.
guys. So everyone listen to this in 10 years and tell us how wrong we
Exactly.
are.
I know. It's
Right.
No, a year from now would be interesting just to see. I'm very curious to see.
Yeah.
Next February.
I guess it always takes a couple big budget ones to fail. Like if Paranormal failed, if the next one was a dud. If,
it's interesting because the last one didn't do as
last
well
one
as
didn't do as well.
expected, which is put a delay on that franchise. Which,
but it was more fun than the others to me. But anyway.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much to Adam and Gavin for coming on the
Thank you,
show.
guys.
And if you haven't seen the film, really, we all three of us give it our endorsement.
It's
Thumbs
on
up.
instant streaming on
Check it
Netflix.
out.
You've got no excuse.
Exactly.
It was really fun to be here, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank
and next week we're gonna have an epic show about conventions.
Woohoo.
We want to do it for
Am I
one
gonna even
time.
And we're having on like a
We're gonna talk.
convention god, I'll call him. He's
Sean
like
Clark.
He's at all of them.
He's no holds bar.
And
I
Elric
told him.
didn't even
Putting him on
go
the spot.
unto his first convention until last year.
No. Chicago flashback.
Oh, okay.
A couple years ago, like 4 years ago.
His
I went
second.
to
I thought you were like a
the one with
convention
Bava
version.
and no. But it was the first time I went as anything there.
Was Elvira there? That's all that matters.
Yeah, she's there this year though.
Fine,
She's
guys.
at Texas
timeless.
Frightmare this year.
Hey.
But it was one of those things where
I loved Frightmare. That's so much
We
fun.
took Elric last
we had
year,
fun doing
and
that.
we're going back this year, kids.
Yeah. That should be fun. I've wanted to do that for a while, and we're going to get the ins and outs of how it all works.
And Sean Clark,
That's about-
I mean, he represents people.
Or, he reps a lot of people that go to these shows. Obviously his biggest client at the moment is Norman Reedus.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because we've talked a lot about what these conventions are like from fan side. Like, why the fuck are they charging $45? Sean will tell you, and it's
said to
actually
me-
some really
he
good
promised
reasons.
me he will answer anything we throw at him. Honestly,
I wonder if you should
So,
ask for questions.
We're gonna.
Okay,
That
this
was
will be
yes.
Okay.
So absolutely.
That'll be next week.
So thanks so much. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.